very much for joining us.
Thanks for calling me back, okay? Thank you.
Someone is not muted. If everyone could please mute, we'd appreciate it. So thank you for joining us this evening. We have two committees. This evening, we have our Educational Support Committee, which is up first, and we have our Student Achievement Committee. So we have many items under each, and I will turn it over to our Educational Support Chair, Mr. Terrence Hurd.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, Dr. Brown, are we going to wait for the superintendent?
We are not. Dr. Cash Dixon, the board members, an email maybe about 10 minutes ago. So we can proceed.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome tonight to tonight's Educational Support Committee meeting. We have some very, very interesting topics tonight, and I like to say that some of the topics that we have tonight is very, very important. And as we move forward with learning here in the Buffalo Public School District, we have an update. Well, we canceled an update with our athletic department. Apologize. And we're going to talk about online security today and the McKinney-Vento program. These are two things that's very important as we move forward. We know that there's been a couple of issues with online across the country and also within our school district about pedophiles that's been reaching out to our children. And today the district is going to present on the securities that went on that we took to try to stop some of these means and some of these measures that's been attacking our children. It's very, very heartfelt, the protection of our children, the health and wellness and the safety of them. And I'm just happy that our district, has been working to prevent, these type of incidents from occurring. But pedophiles that reach out to our children and these incidents, they occur quite frequently. And with the practice because of the COVID-19 virus of learning from home, using tablets, instruments, and the virtual learning process, it opens up the doors, for this type of act to happen. Now, I'm very sincere that we bring in a guest speaker today, Julie Palmer from the PATH organization. PATH is People Against Trafficking Humans. We worked together in the past on certain projects, and she's a very influential person, but she has a history of herself that she'd like to tell the board about and the stakeholders about human trafficking and about the dangers that exist in our communities and to our families and children. Ms. Palmer, will you please introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I'm the executive director and the founder of PATH, People Against Trafficking Humans Incorporated, and we have our enrichment center. We're at 999 Delaware Avenue, actually the former Mental Health Advocates building. We just actually had a community philanthropist purchase us the building. So we were able to move from our leased space into this space, which has been fantastic post-COVID, to have a lot more square footage. And so Terrence had asked me to speak a little bit about what our agency is experiencing and what has been happening, particular to virtual learning and what we're seeing with perpetrators and that impact. So I'll speak briefly on that and briefly on our services and anything we can do to better support your district and the efforts and work that you guys are doing to try to serve kids during this pandemic is not an easy task. My husband's actually a teacher, so I do appreciate and understand how it is affecting the schools from even a personal perspective of an educator, and I have 4 children, so I see it from the parent side. So it is quite a feat you're trying to accomplish right now. But just to speak a bit about what we're experiencing, just by and large in general, before COVID, the primary means with which perpetrators are recruiting is all through the internet. And as you can imagine, that makes a lot of sense because essentially everybody has a device. And so, we have federal partners with Homeland Security, the FBI, and other offices where they say, by and large, the number one recruiting and solicitation is happening through social media, through various apps, dating apps. It can be through gaming. There's a lot of statistics about how perpetrators will just join these apps or gaming and just start chatting with youth. I'm also part of the National Missing Exploited Children and just some of the statistics they have. And there's also a center in Washington, D.C. It's the National Center for Sexual Exploitation, and they do a lot of work looking into that. And they did find a lot of loopholes, unfortunately, with Google and the Google Classroom format, where perpetrators are able to reach out and solicit through those platforms, and not all the blockers in place can stop it. So there's a real reality to that, unfortunately, and I have kids on devices as well. So what I would say is just being educated and more diligent. And I've noticed that every school district is kind of handling it differently as far as protections that they have in place. And we obviously all know that costs money. So the more protections, the more dollars that is for your district. But I would say that we had a discussion as a staff prior to the fall, knowing virtual learning was going to continue. And we have experienced a double in our caseload of youth that have been referred to us. I would say a lot of it has to do with not just virtual learning, but that a lot of the people we serve are now in homes where guardians have to work or can't be there and they're unsupervised. And so some of the things we've done is tried to look at how can we help the students. We have a tutoring program that helps keep them online, and just our interventions that help work with them. But I would suggest that is a big issue and things that you can be considering looking out for. Obviously, specifically, we are looking at human trafficking and what that looks like, which is a $150 billion criminal industry. And it's recruiting, harboring, and transporting individuals for sex or labor trafficking. So it can look a lot of different ways as far as people recruiting, and it's a crime when there's force, fraud, or coercion. So we see an awful lot of coercion that goes on, whether it crosses over with addiction. We also see a lot of grooming or dating. So individuals will date, get compromising videos or photographs of youth, and then blackmail to post that if they don't continue to do more acts. And so we see this as becoming a very large scale problem in our community as well as the nation by and large. And so some of the things we look at are, what are red flags and indicators? Unfortunately, the average age of an individual being exploited is about 12 to 14 years old. In our youth program, we serve 13 through 19, and I would say our average age is 14-year-olds that we are serving. And they are being recruited through a lot of vulnerabilities. One, if someone has experienced abuse or they are running away frequently. I heard through a law enforcement training that if a child runs away more than 4 times, they have about an 86% chance of being exploited. Addiction is quite an overlap. We see anybody who's in a situation where they lack support. Maybe they are more in a poverty status, family that has a lot of different criminal backgrounds, homelessness, domestic violence, foreign-born, which I know you also have a lot of students in that population. We're seeing a lot of overlap of that. And so some of the things that we are looking at statistically, 1 in 6 children runaways are likely to be exploited. Individuals are definitely targeting through these internet means and looking at vulnerabilities. They will date. So we do have a lot of clients that actually have dated their perpetrator before they start requiring or asking of them to do certain things. 1 in 7 children ages 10 to 17 are sexually solicited online, and that's a statistic from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So that means if you have a classroom of 21 kids, 3 of them are being solicited at any time. And how that works is a lot of the apps that the kids use have messaging components. And so we can put parental controls and blocks on that, but we can't control the people that message. And so that's where a lot of it happens. There's also messaging apps where information is deleted as soon as it's exchanged. One thing they found with Google and in the classroom is that perpetrators were sending pornography through Google Docs because there's not an ability to block that document from coming through. So if your child clicks on that, then that document is revealed to your child. There's also chat features in Google. So depending how well that's being monitored or blocked in the school's classroom, kids can be chit-chatting. And a lot of pictures can get exchanged and things can be going on even simply while they're virtually learning in a classroom. So a lot of that has to be dependent on how restrictive or what components the district has to block that exchange. But on social media, I would say that's a huge issue with our youth. They're saying Facebook Messenger, Facebook Live. Of course, Snapchat is a big one, Instagram. A lot of the gaming apps now, there's a Discord where that's kind of a gaming chat, a combination. A lot of those different platforms where their socialization is occurring is where a lot of recruitment. One piece that they will do is when the children start joining those platforms, it will auto send emails to them because you have to use an email to create and register. So it will auto email them messages from people, and some of them can be solicitors or derogatory. So that can even come through, and it might go to their spam or their trash or go right in their inbox. But I experimented with that my son's device, and in his spam was about 35 solicitations that were pretty derogatory on his school Chromebook. So it's just because those platforms push things through. So there's just a lot of different ways that those things can be happening, and it's very difficult to mitigate. We also, unfortunately, are seeing a lot of dynamics with substance use and targeted youth. And a lot of that is if they can get them addicted and then reliant on that addiction, or they already were addicted and then they use that as a lure to say, well, we'll give you more if you do this. And so we're seeing, and particularly with COVID, as I'm sure you're aware, an increase in that usage, increase of that coping strategy, an increase of that component, which makes people then more vulnerable. If you're on ecstasy or if you're high, you're less aware of what you're doing and decisions you're making. And then after the fact, it's been recorded. And there's just a lot. We're working with a grand jury case where the youth were recorded and gang raped, and they were given ecstasy and had no idea what was happening to them. So it's just these kind of components, and that was all just a connection through a social media chat where they met people and heard of a party. There's hotel parties going on. There's just a lot of different things going on where people are engaging. So red flags for you as a school community would definitely be, obviously we know that truancy is a problem by and large just because of the way virtual learning exists, but just kids that are truly not even existing and logging in, or their grades are not happening. That's a piece. Kids that are acquiring items that that they don't have the resources to acquire. A lot of things will get bought for them, hair and nails done, give them things. Somebody purchases them a device, a phone, and says, my boyfriend bought this, or whoever. And just also as a caveat, perpetrators aren't always men and boys. We actually have a number of youth that are being recruited by females. And obviously, it or may not obvious, but the vulnerable communities of the LGBTQ and others are also seeing an increase of being targeted. And so we're just seeing a lot of that overlap happening. You will also see a hypersexualization happening. There's a lot of sexting going on, aggressive behavior, unfortunately, frequent pregnancies in youth that may be engaging. We unfortunately have several youth right now that are expecting, and just navigating that process. People will be branded with tattoos. You'll see an inability for them to make decisions without getting permission from someone. So you'll see kind of these different things going on and how they're engaging, how they're interacting with their peers, inconsistencies in their communication or the way that they would share what's going on. And so those different things, you know, or they can't give you a lot of information on who they're with. They're with an older person, whether it's a young male dating an older, or you know, the female dating older. So it doesn't necessarily, gender doesn't necessarily matter in what we're seeing, especially with the way that things are just cross-culturally happening with that. We're seeing a lot of people take advantage of all different ways of individuals, and so we're seeing all sorts of concerns. But when we find, a lot of times the youth can't even tell us a lot about whoever they are engaged with or have a relationship with, those are red flags of like, well, what do they do for a living? Where are they getting their means from? Or how are they helping you? Well, I'm not really sure. They don't tell me. I mean, those are concerning things when they can't give you a lot of that information. But definitely, as far as their devices, I think obviously the more funding you get, the more controls the districts can put on it. I know some districts, the teachers actually have the capacity to control the virtual classroom when they are instructing the class and can freeze it so kids can't Google search while they're on virtually. And you know, obviously everybody's a different place with that, but just whatever can be done in educating parents so that they truly understand that the freedom of devices is basically handing a child, I say it's like giving them access to everything in the world that basically as adults we have access to. And so just thinking about how they navigate that, even with pornography or even with the ability to, when you Google search, even, you know, a friend of mine was just saying the one day she just was Google searched dicks for the store and didn't think in her head, and just the stuff that pulled up in that. And so just thinking about how our kids have full access to pretty much anything that exists on the internet without restriction. YouTube is also a big issue. So even we've been talking to schools about YouTube restrictions, that if the teacher wants to use YouTube, only sending them that link. Permissions to that link, because again, anything you put on YouTube, you can find a video for. And so it's just a lot of the considerations now on top of addressing COVID, that since we have leaned on virtual instruction, have opened this whole door. And so of course, perpetrators, you know, wherever there's good, there's also evil. So they think, wow, all the kids are doing this and they're on this, so how can I use that to my advantage? And so unfortunately, they are trying to do that, and getting youth compromised or blackmailing or promising them things, and just putting them in situations like that. As far as what our organization does, we have a threefold mission of education, prevention, and restoration. So we spend countless times educating in all different platforms such as this, or schools or businesses or community partners, other organizations. And we do full-fledged you know, education and training on human trafficking in much more detail, and how that's affecting the community. We also do a lot of prevention measures. So some of the referrals we receive are at risk or youth or adults in risky behavior that lends them to potentially being perpetrated. And then our restoration piece is at our enrichment center. As I mentioned, at 999 Delaware, we provide support services to adults and youth who have been affected by sex or labor trafficking or have a trauma that makes them high risk. And we welcome people of any, you know, faith, ethnicity, status. We're really here to serve individuals who need more support. We have social workers that do one-on-one crisis safety engagement engagement, coping support. We have a variety of support groups. Particular to our youth program, we have a licensed agreement with Love 146 where we are able to provide child exploitation prevention curriculums. It's a 5-week curriculum. I highly recommend if there's a way to engage that in your community. The youth actually are extremely responsive to it. It's very relevant and well done to relate to the times with our youth. And it's very informative on ways that they can be more aware of how they're being perpetrated, red flags they can look out for, what are healthy relationships, what are boundaries look like. It's a very excellent curriculum that we can offer. We also have, for both our adult and youth programs, creative arts therapies. So we have an art enrichment program, we have music therapy, we have fitness. We provide meals for every client that comes each day. We have spiritual care support for those who require it. We have clothing and hygiene items. And we have a tutoring program. And actually our tutors are 2 retired Buffalo Public School teachers who approached us and offered to volunteer their time, who are outstanding. They do a fantastic job. And we also have a work readiness program, which helps our clientele find employment. So that's just kind of a quick synopsis of what we do. And if you ever were in a situation where you felt you had those that needed support, I believe I sent Terrence all of our contact information, but we have a 24-hour call and text line at 716-601-5678, which he has, and we also have a website, pathofwny.org, where you can email or reach out. And if you call us, we're happy to set up a time to meet with someone, or if you give us contact info to an individual or family, we will reach out, follow up with them. And we also have virtual as well as in-person capacity. So however people are most comfortable, we provide both options.
Hey, Julie?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to stay on because the district's going to present now. And if anybody have any questions about your program, and some of the things that you spoke about today, is very touching. That's why I was choked up a little bit earlier, because I was speaking to someone just before the meeting today about that's going through some problems and issues concerning some of the topics that you talked about. So I was a little choked up earlier, but right now I want to give the floor to Dr. Tanja Williams, Assistant Superintendent. She's available.
Yes, but Mr. Hurd, Myra Burden will be presenting with Tanja. So I believe Myra will be beginning this presentation regarding internet security.
Thank you. Well, we'll be moving on to a couple of topics of some of the things that the district has done to prevent some of the issues that was going on. We will be speaking about internet security, online securities, and measures that we took to help the families, help the children that's reaching out online or going to sites or different sites that was spoke about by Julie. Also, we talking about peer pressures. Peer pressures. This type of behavior, not only come from pedophilia, but it also comes through other students themselves. So, Mrs. Martin Burden, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Mike Lucci, could you put up the presentation? Thank you. So, good evening, board members and colleagues. Tonight, I'll begin our discussion on internet safety by sharing some of the things that the IT department is doing to promote internet safety. So, the first thing I'd like to talk about and share is that we have our student technology handbook, which can be found at buffaloschools.org/handbook. This handbook was developed just prior to the start of our 2021 school year, and its availability was socialized in the parent and other update meetings at that time, so that parents and students were provided with information about online safety, but also how students should care for and appropriately use the device for an optimal learning experience. More specifically, the Student Technology Handbook provides details on topics that are concerning using technology securely and responsibly. There's a section on that. Cyberbullying, there's also a section on that. And there's also a QR code that can be used to report inappropriate behavior to the district. Student online safety and how parents can assist with students' online safety, and links to sites that can provide information about online safety. Another way that we promote online safety awareness is through our digital citizenship curriculum and a monthly awareness of that. Digital citizenship is how we should act when we're using digital tools, interacting with others online, and what should be taught to help the next generation be better stewards of technology. For schools and teachers, it's what we teach our students and how to interact with the online world. So because we are using learning devices such as tablets and laptops, teachers have the perfect opportunity to educate the students about the digital world and how to be good online digital citizens. So our digital citizenship program is infused with our curriculum by grade level with a focus on monthly themes such as digital etiquette, privacy and security, along with cyberbullying and even appropriate collaborative use of chat features. We've had over 20,000 activities that have been completed since September of 2020. There is additional information about the curriculum and even some monthly infographics for the monthly themes, and you can find that at buffaloschools.org/Digicit. The next way we also promote online safety, and this is directly with regard to the student devices, and that's through content filtering. So inappropriate sites are blocked both internally and externally up to our district network by our content filter, and they're blocked by categories. So we block anything that is labeled as adult or mature content, such as dating sites, drug use, weapons, gambling, gaming, social media, and even adult explicit sites. And we also block downloads and streaming sites. The YouTube access is limited to only those that are labeled as educational. And when I say labeled as educational, labeled by YouTube as educational. The district doesn't use Google Classroom, and as new apps and sites are created frequently, obviously, there's a need and an action to continually adjust our content filters. We also have on our devices a control of the App Store availability. We use self-service as our App Store, and we control the apps that students can install on our devices. Further, student emails are limited. Only high school students have a district email, which is primarily used or intended primarily to be used to submit college applications. And so finally, what we're excited about and coming soon is a digital safety course. The Information Technology Department, specifically the Instructional Technology Department, has been working on developing a digital safety course for parents, which will be offered in partnership with the Office of Parent and Family Engagement. This course will focus on best practices for technology use in the home. It will also be recorded, and it's going to be archived on our BPS website, and we will be offering it in multiple languages, with the additional initial languages being English and Spanish. The first English class is going to be held on April 14th, and then the first Spanish class is going to be held on April 21st. Mike, could you proceed to the next slide? Okay, thank you. So this slide illustrates the 3 one-pager do's and don'ts that we have for internet safety, and they are also found on that digital citizenship web page. So that's buffaloschools.org/Digicit. The first one to the far left of the screen is written for elementary school students, and it just simply points out how students should protect their private information. They should balance their time when using media and other activities, and that they should stay safe online. The second image is primarily for our secondary students. This one emphasizes that students should protect their personal information, to not share passwords, to not post photos online, to not agree to in-person meetings with unknown people, or if they are engaging in online chat with some of their friends and they're trying to meet up with their friends, they should obtain parent permission, and obviously to be aware of online ads. The third image, it provides tips on how parents and caregivers can support their students with internet safety. Parents should be encouraged to have their students keep the computer in a public room in the home, periodically review what the child is doing on the computer, have the child's password, are just a few examples that are detailed on that particular slide. So IT is currently working to ensure that these documents are translated in multiple languages. We expect to have Spanish up before the end of the week, and we will work with the multilingual office to make sure that this information is communicated effectively to our multilingual parents and students. It's also important to note that these documents were done in partnership with the Division of Student Support Services under the leadership of Dr. Tanja Williams, who at this time will discuss the supports that the Division of Support Services offers for students as it relates to internet safety. Dr. Williams?
Thank you. Thank you. Next slide, please. So good evening, Chairman Hurd and President Belton Cotman, board members, Chief Brown Hall, and colleagues. Good evening. So what you've just heard from Chief Burden is that there are lots of preventive supports that our district has in place to try to protect all of our students against being victimized, with respect to the internet. But even with all of the safety guards that she just shared, we know that, technology is constantly evolving. And so even with all of those safeguards, there are times and opportunities for our students to be victimized, as you heard Ms. Palmer speak of earlier. And so when there are situations where students have been victims of harm through internet situations, the district has a pretty systematized, tiered situation of supports. And I just want to go through kind of what those tiers are and situations that might fall into some of the tiers. So at a basic level, let's just say a student has received, as Mr. Hurd mentioned, situations where there's peer pressure to do things, and it's happening through cyber forces, or if it is a first offense of cyberbullying. What we do is we want to work to resolve any harm, and we want to be able to do it in a way that's restorative and as least punitive as we can. And so at a tier 1 level, when situations like that happen, district, school, and we're working together. The district and school administrators are working together along with student support teams that are in the schools and our BPS security team to do an investigation and to see what really was the level of harm and what happened, and then working with everyone, including parents. Parents are the common thread that you'll hear throughout all of the tiers, to try to restore any harm that may have happened and to try to make the incident a teachable moment. But if things either are not being resolved, or they're escalating, or they're at a higher level where students have experienced some form of possibly emotional distress, then they move to a level 2. And we're still working with all of the facets that you see under tier 1. But in addition to that, it ratchets up. And so all of our schools are working with community-based organizations that provide mental health counseling, and we have a phenomenal crisis prevention and response team. And so when there's been any kind of emotional distress, that's where we involve our crisis team, and we're working with mental health supports to try to get counseling and support for the student. It may involve us working with organizations such as the PATH organization that was discussed tonight, to also involve family support, to get support for our families. So when things are not resolved at the tier 1 level and there's been emotional distress, we move to tier 2. Now, if the situation has gone to another level, you heard Mrs. Palmer talk about some really very serious things that unfortunately some of our students could be exposed to, including, issues that involve pornographic websites or being victimized by adults. When things such as that happen, we work very closely with our Buffalo Police Department and governmental officials swiftly and severe, to make sure that whatever happens, whatever the outcome is, that it is as severe. We take it very, very seriously whenever any of our students have experienced any kind of a situation like some of the ones that Mrs. Palmer mentioned. We want to make sure that, again, the situations are handled swiftly and severely. So we do have a tiered process that's in place, with the, implementation of I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But with the implementation of COVID and students working, on their laptops and on their tablets more than they ever have before, it was necessary for us to put in place a tiered process so that we're supporting students, but we're also looking out for their safety. Next slide, please. So in addition to students being victimized, we've had a few situations where students have knowingly themselves violated our code of conduct. And we have a code of conduct addendum that the Board of Education recently approved, and included within that addendum is explicit language on digital citizenship and the expectations. In fact, we have a full page. It starts halfway through page 5 and it goes halfway through page 6 that is dedicated just to that. And so when students have violated any measures in a knowing fashion within our code of conduct addendum, it could result in the district temporarily confiscating the student's laptop or tablet for the purpose of inspecting and investigating whatever the violations were. And if it is founded, it could go from a level 1 penalty, which again is focusing on restorative practices and repairing harm, right through to a level 2 or 3, both of which are out of school suspensions. Level 2 would be a short-term suspension, but a level 3 is the most serious thing that a school principal and district really can do to a student. And so we do take it very seriously. That's a long-term superintendent suspension hearing. If the actions involved constitute any kind of crime under state and or federal laws, well, then it becomes a situation where we're working with our security team, local, state, and federal law enforcement officials, possibly governmental entities. So, it could escalate to that level. It is a crime, and so it could escalate to that level. Next slide, please. I believe that concludes our presentation. And so at this time, we're able to entertain questions.
Okay. At this time, if any board members or administrative staff members have any questions about the presentation today, please feel free to talk with Dr. Taja Williams, Mrs. Burden, or Julie Palmer. Kindly please raise your hand and I can call on you. Okay, I do have a hand raised by President Sharon Belton Common.
Thank you. I want to thank Julie Palmer and Tanja Williams and Myra Burton for their presentations. I am particularly interested in this human trafficking piece. The last two seminars I attended, the last two conferences I attended seminars on this issue, and I'm wondering if we are doing enough as a district as far as educating our students. I'm wondering if anyone can tell me if it's included, this topic of human trafficking is included in any part of our curriculum, our sex education or anything, because one of the things that recently came, maybe about 2 years ago, we had a young lady who was recruited for sex trafficking at the library downtown. And I understand that those guys are always on the hunt for young girls and her mother, etc. And so I'm wondering if we can do maybe a link that connects our Julie Palmer and Path Enrichment can be one of our community partners and allow us to do a link that connects this information to our website so that under services. But this is a serious issue. And from what I've heard and been told, I think we have Kelly Galloway is also doing things in this area. And what I've been told is that Buffalo is prime territory because we're within 6 to 8 hours of a lot of areas, including Montreal and New York City and Albany and etc. So I'm wondering if we need to ask the superintendent to take a look at this and start incorporating this topic some way, somehow into our classrooms, because there's a major issue going on with women being sex trafficked, and if many of you are aware, there is a large number of African American women in this country, and I'm not talking about 10,000. I think the last number I saw was upwards of probably about 50,000 who have just disappeared. Family can't find them, and they believe that it is connected to a trafficking ring that exists. And I'll be honest with you, I've had years ago a young lady who had been picked up by truckers. They called her a beaver, that there was a beaver trying to hitchhike, and she ended up getting with the right guy, getting saved that day. But I just want to know what we can do to make sure that our children are educated on and our parents are educated on this topic, because Buffalo, they say, is a prime area for this to happen with the borders that we're near.
So President Cotman, I certainly would be very interested in connecting with Ms. Palmer. Certainly her organization, I think she very eloquently tonight shared that they have a level of expertise, in this area. I would certainly be interested in moving that forward and seeing if there are some kind of comprehensive, curriculum pieces, so that what we're presenting to younger children, we're not presenting, to older grade level children. So I would love to make that contact.
Okay, thank you. Now, the other thing is that April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. And I looked on the calendar. If you saw my head down, I was looking to see what dates are celebrated nationally in regards to this topic. And I think that falls under it, although human trafficking happens in January. National Day of Human Trafficking Awareness was January the 11th. October is National Cybersecurity Month. I was wondering if we might think about a campaign or something and tie it into somehow. Ideally, you know, when we talk about child abuse, we are normally talking about sexual abuse, but I think it's important that I also think we can tie that into cyber security as well. I just think that there's a need with the spring coming on that we do a campaign of some sort. What do you think about that, Mrs. Palmer? Have you been involved in any campaigns like that?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, January was National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. So we did actually a campaign in January. So absolutely, you know, collaborating with partners such as yourself and addressing that in a broader scale beyond even just human trafficking itself is a fantastic idea. And just, you know, to piggyback some of the things you mentioned, which were fantastic, there's multiple ways we have engaged with school districts. And so some of the ways that we have done that is we actually have certain districts where my staff or I speak to different classes. As you indicated, the health classes, they have us come in annually and we speak into those classrooms for a full day. We have other districts who have had us come in and do a full presentation for the faculty as well as for the student body. I understand this year is definitely more tenacious with virtual, but we have been adapting to that and offer virtual platforms to do that. So it really can look whatever way works best. Also fully agree that how we present to the younger grades is always different than the older grades. And so we have adapted our presentations based on the population we're speaking to. But I think it would be a fantastic idea, and I appreciate this group's desire to educate, because the reality is, whether we want to say it's happening or not, it is happening. And we have kids from every district too. And I even like to make sure the community knows that, because I think unfortunately people will just say it's an inner city problem, but we have children from all the surrounding districts of Western New York. So I think it's really important to talk about it. And we don't necessarily do it in a way of making the youth feel like they're a, quote, human traffic victim. There's ways we can have these conversations with them in how we present that gets them more aware of what is inappropriate engagement and contacts and what they should be better understanding. So I think that'd be fantastic, whether we push into a classroom and do it, whether it's a school-wide presentation, whether the faculty get engaged, but we're happy to help you with whatever you want to do for a campaign. However we can support you as a district, we would love to be able to do that, just fully understanding how difficult things are and how you're having to navigate everything. So, and if we can support your district, even if you have cases or concerns, please don't hesitate to ask. We work with at-risk or people victimized, and no referral or phone call is a bad one. We really are happy to even just talk through things, or if a family member, we even get parents that'll call with questions. We're happy to help. We've had a few parents where we just come in and work with them on how to even navigate their kids, how to help with that. So there's so many ways we're happy to help, but we would be thrilled to be a part of any campaign idea. I think that's fantastic.
Well, I'm not thinking of anything real elaborate, but I am thinking of maybe definitely talking with the superintendent to see, and Dr. Williams, to see what ideas they have. But certainly I would definitely like to make sure that your link is definitely on our website, because I think that's a huge issue. And it just gave me an idea that maybe there's a need, Dr. Williams, to set up a different type of search mechanism on our website, and maybe we need to start looking at some social emotional searches, that people can connect, like, human trafficking or sex abuse, and it would take them to different things. Mm-hmm. And that's some ideas, but thank you so much. I appreciate this presentation. This is a serious problem. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, President Belton Cotman. Is there any other board members have any questions, or maybe for the staff members? Okay, since there's no more questions, I would just like to say that one thing you mentioned about girls being trafficked, and I'd like to say that the young men are being trafficked just as much as the boys right now. And I was on the sex offense task force in the state of Georgia where I've seen things I can't talk about, but where we do raids into pedophile houses that was probationers or parolees, and we look into their homes and look for any type of inappropriate activities that goes on and bring them back before the judge in court. So I see over and over, I've seen these cases, and I see them right here in the city of Buffalo. And Buffalo is a gateway for sexual trafficking and harboring due to the closeness of Rochester, the border of Canada, and there's a lot of streams out here, that goes on. Also would like to say, because the parent, I just received a text message from a parent. I had a couple of parents that gave me permission to talk about this, is that within the district, it was a couple of times this winter where I was out 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning looking for children that left the home because they met somebody online, and the district has helped us out with some of those kids. And 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, my family and we calling people up, did Facebook blasts and had people out looking for it. And one of the main concerns that we have as going to the police station is that they don't identify anyone as being missing until 48 hours later. And so for 48 hours, you have, there's no alerts going out, or Amber alerts going out, for these children, that's left home that's been pulled or they're that they've been violated, any kind of way. But there's got to be more protections out here, to help these families, these children. And I'm glad that this district has stepped up, with some counseling and mentoring, for the families and moving forward. And I just received another text message from another parent that we talked about, saying, thank you, I appreciate it very much. Another one that President Cotton helped me on a couple of months ago is that one of my great friends, she lost her daughter.
That's too much. That's too much.
Yeah, so
that's too much. That's too much.
This is serious, and I think that as a district we really need to address this and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. I think, are we ready for our next topic? I believe Dr. Tanja Williams will be presenting regarding McKinney-Vento.
Okay. McKinney-Vento, President Common has some concerns about the program McKinney-Vento, and we spoke briefly with Dr. Tanja Williams, and Dr. Tanja did put a presentation together about some of the concerns. And I'm going to let President Belton Cotton go ahead and lead this.
Well, I think it would be appropriate for Tanja, for Dr. Williams to present first, and then we can answer questions. And then, President Belton Cotman always has questions. We'll answer them, or we'll follow up with the correct information for President Belton Cotman. So Dr. Williams, please proceed.
Sure. If Mr. Lucci could please put up the presentation. Thank you. So tonight, my intent in sharing a presentation on our Buffalo Public Schools McKinney-Vento program, which is our homeless education program, is really to enlighten you in 4 different areas. I want to begin the presentation by talking a little bit about what McKinney-Vento is. I'll then move into talking about some of the pillars of work nationally and statewide, and where we fit in with that work, our own Buffalo Public Schools McKinney-Vento and the work that we're engaged in. And then I'll talk a little bit about enrollment data over these last 12 months and during this time of COVID. And then I'll wrap it up with, a full disclosure of transparency. And I'm going to share where we have some opportunities for improvement within the program. Next slide, please. So I wanted to begin by sharing kind of an overview of what McKinney-Vento is, because I know a lot of us hear McKinney-Vento and we associate it with homelessness, but we don't really know where it came from. or who even is leading the department of McKinney-Vento. Right now, within our department of McKinney-Vento, it's a small staff, but they work very, very hard. They are housed over at School 12 on Ash Street. The Director of Student Placement and Registration is Ms. Kelly Daniels, and she really leads the day-to-day work within the department. But there's also a supervisor for the McKinney-Vento program, and that is Wa Mai. We also have a community education leader in the department that works very, very hard, and her name is Miss Marva Brown. So it's a small staff, but they do a lot of work. That's who leads McKinney-Vento. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit about why it's even called McKinney-Vento. I did some research myself just to find out. And there were two House of Representative individuals, one being Bruce Vento and the other being Stuart McKinney. And, they came together in kind of a bipartisan effort, one being Republican, one being a Democrat, and felt very strongly that it was important for persons who were experiencing temporary homelessness to be afforded as many supports and services as possible. And so for specifically the school portion of it, or the educational portion, it has really been able to survive different presidencies and initiatives. It was included in No Child Left Behind. It then was included in Race to the Top, and it's now included within our Every Student Succeeds Act. I felt it was important to give a common definition for really what McKinney-Vento is, so that we're all understanding what it really is. And it's when children and youth lack fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residency. And that could mean that students are living in hotels, motels, trailer parks, shelters, cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, bus and or train stations, or doubling up in homes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. In December of 2016, it used to be such that students who were awaiting foster care placement, because they were temporarily displaced and met the definition that you see here, were considered homeless. And in 2016, according to the ESSA Act, that part was removed. And so now students who are awaiting foster care are no longer necessarily or automatically considered homeless. It's important for us to all keep in mind that this is a population of students that is near and dear to many of our hearts. Unfortunately, it's a population that sometimes can be looked at as almost invisible. Where that you have populations of students who may be experiencing temporary homelessness, but it's not really highlighted. And I know that President Belton Cottman, this is a program that is very, very dear to her heart. And when I look at this population of students, it is directly aligned to our education bargain and what we are about within this district, and that is making sure that all of our children are provided supports and services, but especially, as Facet 5 speaks to, our students who are most needy. And certainly that's a population of children that fall into that facet. Next slide, please. So when we look at some of the federal and state requirements for the program, we know that, one of the main points when you look at everything is that we want our homeless youth, or our children who are experiencing homelessness, to have equal access to education, supports, and services, just as their non-homeless peers have. That's really, in a nutshell, what we expect. We don't want the factor of homelessness to serve as a barrier. We want to do everything that we can to try to fill that gap. And so there are 6 requirements that our state education requires. And I want to talk about these 6 and share with you for Buffalo how we meet these requirements. So the first one talks about how students and youth are to be allowed to continue their education in their district of origin. And we certainly do this, and we do this very well. We work very closely, specifically our community education leader. When we get students that come over to Ash Street to register, and the student or the parent may say, you know, we're from a suburban district, or we're from, you know, another district, and because we're experiencing homelessness and we're now living in Buffalo, the district may be telling us that we can't continue to be educated in that school district. We very assertively work with those districts to ensure that they know that the law reads that yes, they can continue within their home school district if they so choose. And it works both ways. And so if we have Buffalo Public School students who happen to be residing outside of the city because they're experiencing homelessness, we again work to keep those students within our district, because consistency is important. You know, when you're young and you're experiencing things that you have no control over at all, or when you're a parent and you're experiencing hardships, the last thing you need to have to worry about is trying to get your child, you know, enrolled into a new district and acclimated to new situations. And so where we have to, it's called New York State Teachers, and it's a hotline, and they are very versed on the law. And so we work closely with that organization when we have to, if we're working with other districts, to make sure that they're very clear that those children are able to continue in their district of origin. The second piece that the New York State Education Department requires is that districts that have children experiencing homelessness must provide transportation, meals, and educational services. And we do that, again, very, very well. We make sure we work very closely with our BPS transportation department. And so again, if a student, you know, was a BPS student and has had to move outside of the city due to homelessness, our transportation department does a magnificent job making sure that we provide transportation to whatever district we need to provide transportation to, so that there is consistency. Normally, for transportation purposes, it could take 7 to 10 days for a student to get transportation, but under this guideline, we want it immediate. And so it could be in as short a time as 1 day and no longer than 3 days before we get that transportation piece set up. So we do that piece very well. The next piece involves identifying students who may be experiencing homelessness. And we do have a student housing questionnaire that when we get new students in, it's a part of the registration packet that families are able to fill out. And we do it in a way that is respectful to students. When there are conversations that are had with parents regarding, you know, if they indicate that they're experiencing homelessness, we do it in a way where it's respectful, you know, it's private, you know, it's not broadcasted. And, you know, this is one of the requirements that the state has and that we do for every single student that comes to BPS to enroll. If they check that they're not experiencing temporary displacement, that's fine, but it's a part of the registration packet. And if they are, then that's where they meet with one of our McKinney-Vento folks. The next piece is immediate enrollment in school, and that's a huge piece. We work closely to make sure that we get students in school immediately. Even when students and parents show up with no documentation, because when you are experiencing homelessness, it's possible that, you know, you don't have, you know, some of the documentation that we require as you enroll in. And so we work closely. We work with social services. We work with the birth certificate office upstairs, and we do, you know, a lot of the lead work to try to get in, you know, the documents that parents need in order to get their children registered. So we do that piece. Number 5, providing educational supports and services. You'll notice that that's circled in red. We do quite a bit with respect to this during this pandemic. You know, we had our supervisor and our educational, community educational leader going out and picking up hotspots and taking them to shelters. They picked up school packets when we first, you know, got into the situation with school closures. They delivered backpacks to some of the shelters and families. And recently we started a process under Ms. Daniels where 10 families are being called every single day that we are aware of who are experiencing homelessness, just to do a check and connect on how you're doing and you know, how things are going, how we can better support. But I have that circled, and I'll come back to it in a little bit, because that's one of our opportunities for improvement, and we can continue to improve in that area. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. The final piece, which deals with maintaining a dispute resolution process, we also do that very well. The law requires that if a student or a family comes in to be enrolled, and we have questions about, you know, whether it's valid or not, we enroll them in school and we ask questions and investigate after. And so we do that. Now, what I found out today, which was interesting, is that we always err on the side of the parent, and that to date, we haven't had to implement the dispute resolution process because we follow it so well. So our staff at, you know, Ash Street that work in McKinney-Vento are not necessarily going back and forth with parents. They're enrolling the children. So there's really no need for the dispute piece, because we're erring, especially at this time, on behalf of our parents. Next slide. So this slide is a little, I mean, when I looked at it, I was shocked. This is a slide that's looking at our BPS numbers of identified students who have, over this last year, experienced unstable housing. And so when we pulled our data from March of 2020, right as the COVID crisis, the pandemic hit, we were at about 964 children, families within our district who were experiencing homelessness. When you fast forward 6 months later, we were down to 171. That's a big drop. And when you look at, as of February of 2021, where we are, you can see that it's starting to creep back up. And we were at, as of February 28th, about 282 families. So it is shocking. We know that while the identification has dropped, that there are many families that we know of that are out there that are certainly experiencing homelessness. And so it caused me to pause and to wonder, how could our data look like this during a pandemic when we know that families have lost jobs and, there are all these difficulties happening? And so I believe about a month ago, there was a national study that was shared. I believe Ms. Belton-Cotman shared it with us, and it came out of Michigan. And it's a study that talked about the loss in the mass shuffle in a virtual void. And what it discussed is that our data is not the only data that looks this way. This is an issue nationally, statewide, and within Western New York, where there was this sharp decrease with the impact of COVID. And there are certain reasons that contributed to, why the data looks like this. The first is that it became very difficult to identify children and youth experiencing homelessness during the pandemic, because sometimes, relationships are pretty big. And so when students come to school, and, you know, they're able to speak to their counselors, you know, teachers, you know, and share some things, you know, that's how we find out sometimes that families are experiencing this. Well, with the implementation of virtual learning, you know, some of that contributed to us not knowing that there were children that may have been experiencing homelessness. So distance learning contributed. School closures and shutdowns also, you know, contributed. But also there was a relocation of many of our families and an inability to contact some families. You know, as we all know, when you're surviving and you're experiencing homelessness and possibly, you know, illness or wellness, you know, non-wellness of family members, you're not necessarily thinking that, you know, you need to call the school to let the school know that this is what you're experiencing. If your phone is shut off, you know, it became a challenge to continue contact with some of our families. And in addition to this, we wondered, how is it that the number dropped so much? But what the research shared, that Ms. Belton-Cotman shared, is that, you know, with the moratorium that was placed on families being evicted due to non-payment of rent, you know, it probably contributed to some decrease of homelessness, but we know that that's not forever also. And so we want to be proactive in knowing what could be coming down the pipeline. So some of this, you know, it was shocking for me to see it initially. It was a little bit affirming to know that we aren't the only district, you know, across the country whose data looks like this. There's been an under-identification nationally. And so now the numbers are beginning to creep back up. Next slide, please. So with all that I just shared, and it was just a quick overview, I believe in full transparency. And so there certainly have been some challenges with McKinney-Vento, and I view challenges as opportunities for improvement. And I do believe that within Buffalo Public Schools, we are certainly up for the challenge to make sure that these improvements are in place. So for about 5 years, we have not had a grant that specifically is dedicated to moving the work within McKinney-Vento forward. And even when we did have the grant, it was, you know, it was a small grant. It was less than $100,000 that we had. And so we know that, you know, in a city like Buffalo that has been documented as one of the cities across the country that experiences poverty at a high rate, that there has to be some advocacy for us to get adequate funding for, you know, for our children and families. But even with respect to us not having dedicated funding, we've been able to maintain a small staff. And one of the things that, you know, we've put in place is that we're looking at creating systems within schools. Right now, a lot of what you heard earlier is done on the front end. We make sure that when families come in, we get them transportation right away, we get them enrolled right away, we get them registered. Those pieces are in place. And so now it's time to move to the next level, which is providing supports for the children once they are in these schools. And so one of the things that we have begun doing is to notify our principals and student support teams as they're getting children, because we have it in Infinite Campus, our school-wide student information system, but unless you're going in and looking every day for a flag to see if the child that you've received is experiencing that, it's possible that you wouldn't know. And so as we're enrolling children who may be experiencing homelessness, we're sending information to our principals and our student support teams so that they know and they can dispatch support for the children when they get to the schools.
I need to move.
That's huge.
Athletic questions.
And so we just learned that there is some funding. In fact, it came out
Next week's
today.
agenda.
Mr. Hurd, you're not muted, please.
So we just found out that there is funding that we will be able
Cass
to
said he
apply
will
for.
answer them today,
Mr. Hurd?
but it's not on the call.
And we intend to do that. So the state's grant will come out in November, and we've been closely poring over the last grant that was submitted to see where there were gaps and to see how we can make sure that
We
those
also have
gaps.
a very serious issue at Bennett.
Mr. Hurd,
Sorry,
Terrence Hurd,
apologize.
please mute.
Okay.
Apologize, I thought I was on mute.
That's okay. So we just want to make sure that we're filling all of the gaps so that this time when we apply, just like I shared earlier on the slide, we are up for the challenge. So those are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that we get some money in Buffalo Public Schools for our most needy children and families. The second piece that I shared that was circled in red that I said I'm going to come back to as far as supports and services, yes, we do. We got the hotspots and we've delivered backpacks. And, again, we've done some baseline things that are good, but there were a group of us that went to visit our sister city last year. It was a little bit before the pandemic hit, Rochester, and we were able to walk through and see some of the things that they are doing, which were very innovative. I think we all left impressed, and then COVID hit. And so we want to make sure that, we are seeking donations and supports aggressively for our children. One of the things, that they had were little wellness packets with things like deodorant and lotions and things that some people take for granted. But again, when you're surviving and you're experiencing hardships, they're small things, but they're not small things. They had new clothing for their children. And so, it went beyond just, uniforms for kids, but, our children want to assimilate, and so they want to wear denims just like, the other kids wear. And, some of their things were gently used, but a lot of their things were brand new. And so we want to, get to a place where we're also in a position, because I believe that there are folks out there and businesses out there that would be willing to support, something that's worthy. Want to thank all of the board members and my colleagues. This past Christmas, I have a couple of pictures up. You may not be able to see them very well, but the donations that you gave really helped to, it probably will be a life impacting experience for children, who again, Christmas could have been very dire, because when you're surviving and you're looking at toys or food is going to win out every single time. But to children, you were able to help, every child got, a toy. Every child got things to keep them warm, mittens, socks, hats. And it was really something to see. And I think it reinvigorated the staff also. I think they were just as excited as probably the children and parents were who received the items. So we want to do more of that kind of thing. In addition, there are many stakeholder groups in our city that are all working with the same families. We've got to get that better aligned. So I know that there are churches that have pantries and that work with the homeless population. There are community organizations. And then the city of Buffalo has a department which works with this population. And I think we would maximize our resources if we were all working together and aligning, putting together what we all have. Finally, I think, you know, we talked a little bit about it in the last presentation, and I think it's another area that, you know, certainly we're going to work with in making sure that, you know, on our webpage that our families who may be experiencing this kind of need, it's easy access for them to know, you know, who to call, where to go to, how to get the help that, that they need. Next slide, please. And that concludes the presentation. I'll take questions at this time.
At this time, if any board members have any questions concerning the McKinney-Vento program and the district needs and what we need to help keep our program going with McKinney-Vento in this district, please raise your hand. And I do have President Sharon Belton-Cotman hand raised already. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Dr. Williams. You know, we pull you so many ways. I mean, you make me think of that little stretch toy that just keeps on stretching no matter what you lay on her. And I want to thank you for that. I want to also thank the staff that's involved in this. This is huge because I don't think, I felt it was necessary to bring it to the board's attention because as we start doing our budgeting, our priorities for our budgeting, I really think that this is an area that the board needs to take a more closer look at because our numbers are down significantly, and you said everyone's numbers are down, but we're talking people here. We're not talking, you know, widgets. We're talking people, families, and their lives. And I think that we can grow that area and do and expand it. And that's the reason why I really wanted. And I'm grateful that you brought it up here before our budget. As I was looking at some of the information about the CARES Act that's out there. I hope I said it right. They're saying that this population needs to be supported. And we're going to see a lot of people become homeless after these moratoriums are lifted and things like that. And so I just am praying and hoping that our district, because we're number 3, I think we're one of the very poorest areas. I just hope that we can do more, that's all. And that's why I wanted to share it with the board members, because I think it's something that we need to focus in on when we start talking about the budget.
I agree.
Thank you, President Cotman. Are there any other questions? Well, personally, I would like to say thank you, Dr. Townsend Williams, for all the work that you put into your presentations today. We know that it took a lot, and
Terrence, Larry has his hand up.
I don't see Larry. Okay, I'm sorry, Larry.
Finish your thought, Mr. Hurd, and then I'll speak.
Okay.
Go ahead.
These are 2 very touching programs that we're dealing with in our district, and they're very serious because they talk about the needs of our students, our children bases that's in our classrooms, is working with our teachers. It's a trickle effect that goes through our classrooms, through our teachers, to the homes, and, you know, back into the building. As former educators, we know that we know there's something wrong with our children. We know if they're coming to class hungry, or if they put their head down on the desk, if they're not feeling well, or if they're going through something. We know that the days they come in happy and cheering, you know, as educators. And, you know, these are signs that we look out for and continue to look for these signs in our children. And, you know, talk to them. We know that you have great rapport and great relationships with our students, and continue with those relationships. And so that if something like this occurs, you know, in their life, or any hazards that happens within the family, or you know, with their friends, you know, they can come talk to you about it. And we appreciate the work that your teachers and administrative staff members, our principals, and are doing in the classroom, in the buildings. That goes for, you know, all schools in the city of Buffalo. And continue on with the work, and let's work together to end this type of tragedies that's happening within the families and sicknesses and within people. Thank you again. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. And thank you, staff, for the great presentations. Dr. Williams, especially all the detailed information that you shared. I just want it stated for the public. We heard from a few parents concerned about our mask policy in regards to students with disabilities and those with medical needs. Myself and I think 2 other board members respectfully requested that this item be discussed at our educational support committee. So I just want that noted. And I still feel like it's something that needs a discussion by this board. Dr. Williams did provide a very detailed response by email on a particular case that was very helpful for me, but I still think it's a matter that this board needs to discuss collectively.
Well, I can confer with Mr. Scott that I have received a lot of emails and talked to parents about mask policies and troubles that has been going on within the district. But we've referred to Dr. Charlton Wills, who also will talk about the code of conduct and the safety and wellness of all families, of all children that's within our school district and on our buses also. So if anybody want to reflect on Mr. Scott's question at this time.
We're way beyond time. I'm not expecting a discussion at this point, but I just wanted to know that it needs to be discussed at some point, and that it was requested to be discussed today.
I have. I'll talk to you personally about that, Mr. Scott.
Thank you.
As of right now, there was one other topic that was supposed to be on the agenda. It was Dr. Cash was to answer questions about the athletic department and its future concerns from our stakeholders. We know we have stakeholders on the line that was waiting to hear answers for the questions, but hopefully the board can convene and speak about this on a later date. So with that, move back on to Dr. Brown Hall.
I will say regarding those questions that we received at approximately 2 o'clock, Dr. Cash did indicate in his email to the board that he will answer those questions and send them right back out to the board members with answers tomorrow when he returns to the office. So then board members, you can feel free to share the answers with your constituents. So your constituents really don't have to wait long for answers to those questions that were received. Thank you very much. We're going to turn it over to Dr. Kathy Evans Brown for our student achievement meeting. We have 3 topics. They aren't very long.
Sorry, Dr. Brown Hall.
Whose hand was up?
Jennifer McCool.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask real quick, I don't want to delay too much longer, but the questions, were those posted to the board before they went out today at 2? I don't remember seeing those before. Did we receive those?
No, I'm sorry, no, Ms. Cozy. We haven't, questions will be formulated by people in the community, and that's when I receive the questions, and I send them directly to Dr. Cash so that he can have time to review the questions and give a report about the questions. I did reach out to board members about formulating, the athletic ad hoc committee about formulating questions concerning the future of the athletics here for the spring sports.
Okay. No, I just wanted to know if those came out to the rest of the board before I saw them earlier, if I missed them. Thank you.
Okay, but I also requested that we can discuss this next week during our board meeting also. So I will refer to President Belton comment about that.
Thank you.
Dr. Evans Brown, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Nice seeing you all. So this is the student achievement section. And, you know, as Dr. Brown mentioned, we're going to start with the Jesse Ketchum resolution update. I see Dr. Will Caresses here. And then the New York State Regions exams and grades 3 through 8 tests. And then lastly, connecting and engaging all learners. So with that, we'll start with Dr. Will Caresses.
Thank you, Dr. Evans Brown. Thank you, Dr. Brown Hall, and good evening, board members. You're aware that recently the board approved a resolution to develop a policy around school choice for Jesse Ketchum scholars. In case you're not familiar with all of the details, about how scholars are selected. They're nominated by their schools after they meet established criteria, and then they are distinguished as the top 8th grade student in their class. So the purpose of the policy was to assure that Jesse Ketchum scholars have every opportunity to attend the high school of their choice. So Mike, if you can get the slide up, I just have a couple of points of where we are in the development process for that policy and some of the high points. That's not it. Mike, it's a single separate slide that says Jesse Ketchum admissions policy. There it is.
Oh.
Mike, do you want me to email it to you quickly? There you go. All right. Thank you. So just to go over some high-level points that are emerging in the draft, we are still in the process of getting some feedback, but you will have a preliminary draft that over the weekend that you'll be able to table for next week's meeting. We can continue to take edits, and then you'd be ready to vote on the policy for your April meeting. But to begin with, the policy does envision that Jesse Ketchum Award winners will be recanvassed for a new first and second high school choice during July of each year, and that's if they choose to participate. We already know just from some emerging data that Dr. Brown Hall had collected, most Jesse Ketchum scholars already get their first choice, but this will be an opportunity for them to be recanvassed and to consider some other options. The procedure as it's unfolding now does not require any change in the timetables for the BPS high school selection process that normally takes place over the winter and spring for our 8th graders, or any of the timetables related to what the Jesse Ketchum board does to select their scholars. So that's a good development that we've been able to produce something that doesn't disrupt any of the timetables. I know that was a concern for board members. You know, how would we navigate the calendar? And we think we've come up with solutions to take care of that. It's also envisioned that schools with ninth grade classes of 110 and above will have 2 extra seats added and set aside for students now in the recanvass who want to take part in the recanvass who may be interested in selecting these schools. But if you're below 110, that school would have 1 extra seat added and set aside for recanvassed Jesse Ketchum winners. The one thing I want to remind the board of is that this is just a starting point for 2021, and we want to make sure that we're careful and thoughtful about how we launch a policy after the current admission cycle has already transpired and the high school choice process has already taken place, because we want to make sure we're supporting current BPS applicants from being displaced by any of the decisions we make with this policy. And then for criteria-based schools, Jesse Ketchum winners would still need to meet the established admissions requirements at the time of the recanvass. So the best examples of that is if the student in the recanvass now was interested in attending Performing Arts High School, they would still have to be part of an audition process. They would have to meet the standards for that audition committee. Similarly, if a school has an admissions test, they would have had to participate in that process as well. And finally, when you receive a draft, I just ask that you reach out to me with any edits. that you may have, any suggestions that you may have to improve the policy. And I will certainly review those with Dr. Cash, and we'll just have it be a part of the policy that the board will consider for its vote. Thank you. I'll take any questions if you have them.
So do we have any questions? Okay, I see. Can you move this mic? Yeah, thank you. President Belton Cotman.
I thought we were doing good until we got to number 4. And I'm not going to, moving forward, let things slip by. I let something slip by at the last committee meeting, and it went, and things got out of control. So it's a known fact that the tests are a problem in the criteria-based schools with letting people get in. Our understanding in writing that resolution, I assisted Lou Petrucci in it, is to make it clear that if a child has gone through the steps and is at the top of their class, that they are given that opportunity. And to put an additional step in there, I understand the performing arts piece. I do not understand to take the test piece. The admissions test piece. That's major for me. That's a no-no. Okay, I have a concern about that. Thank you.
There's a hand raised. Thank you, President Cotman. Do you want to respond to that, Dr. Persis, or should I move on?
I mean, no, I certainly understand President Cotman's comment. I guess the one thing that we would have to then look at is those of you who were on the board when we were undergoing our Office for Civil Rights monitoring, you remember that annually the board approved all aspects of the admissions process related to any of our competitive admissions schools and all of our criteria-based schools. One of the things that you did approve is that there would be no exceptions to what the established criteria are to get into any particular school. The reason you did that is because I think wisely you anticipated that if you make an exception, even for a very noble and worthy purpose, in this case like Jesse Ketchum Winners, then there would be opportunity for other exceptions to come along for other very noble and worthy causes. So it's really the board's decision. It's the board and the superintendent. I think that's good feedback, and it's something that I'll discuss with Dr. Cash and absolutely have it considered, prior to you getting a draft.
You need to consider, because if we take a look at what has happened in regards to city honors in particular, we had more children, minority children, passing the admissions test under the old test than we do now. We have fewer minorities at city honors than on the date that we had our lawsuit filed and answered. So there's a problem with testing with certain people, but these children have already proven that they are Excelsiors, okay? And that's the reason for crafting that Jesse Ketchum Award and putting that in like that. It was not to say, oh, once you become a Jesse Ketchum Award, you still got to jump through the same hoops that everyone else has. It was because we felt that they've already jumped through hoops to get to the head of their class.
Right.
I have a problem with that one. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. There's another hand raised in City Hall. Vice President Lou Petrucci.
Lou Petrucci tonight. Thank you, Kathy Evans. I just want to say that I think this is a great first step in trying to both retain and recognize our Jesse Ketchum Award winners. My concern is more about the universe and the number of students, the 1 and 2s. I will say that last time I was on the board, the majority of Jesse Ketchum Award winners did not receive their first choice. If they are now, that's wonderful. That's great. Because in the past that they had it, and that was one of the problems that we had, was that oftentimes these high achieving students were going to schools outside the district, or they were frustrated over their lack of ability to attain a seat in one of our criterion-based schools. So I guess that was kind of it. The second thing, though, is that what I like about it also is that it presents multiple pathways in order to gain access into our criterion-based schools. Too often, parents felt that you had to go to a very small set of schools in order to be accepted into one of these criterion-based schools. I think it broadens the reach and gives multiple pathways for our students to get into these criterion-based schools. And I think that's going to have a positive impact across the district for all of our grammar schools.
Right, it's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Vice President Lou. There's another hand raised. Board Member Hurd?
Yes, thank you, Vice President Evans Brown. My question is, with this policy, I would like to see something done with the borderline students, the students that don't qualify to meet the criterion scores, but that's borderline. I'd like to see maybe programs set aside for those children in this package that maybe that can escalate them, to a criterion-based school or to a higher performing school. If there's maybe a after-school program or a summer program or even more types of programs within the classroom that these students can receive, so that they don't be left out or just left midway in our district.
Right, that's a great suggestion, and I would like to share with you. You may not be aware, Mr. Hurd, but the district has a very robust relationship with Buffalo Prep. And they are an organization that is serving more and more Buffalo Public School students in their after school and summer program. That program is actually uniquely set up to serve underrepresented students and prepare them for having aspirations to attend any school that they want, and then to compete for slots in those schools. And we, under Dr. Cash's leadership, we've really boosted that relationship, where in the past we maybe nominated 50 or 60 students a year. We are now nominating hundreds and hundreds of students through a more centralized process. So that partnership, and I can certainly talk to you offline about it and give you more details, but that really goes to the comment you just made about how do we support particularly underrepresented students to have all of the tools they need to compete for any slot, that they have aspirations for. So that's a great point, and I'd love to talk to you about it.
At Buffalo Prep, I believe it takes about 50 students or a little more.
No, they have more. They don't take the hundreds that we nominated, but from that, they will reach out to all of those parents, and they will probably get at least 50 in each of the grade levels that they work in. So I think they have a few hundred students that they touch each year, but I can give you all of that information, and I can even set up something for you to have a conversation with the staff at Buffalo Prep.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Caress.
Thank you. That's a very excellent program. Is it still operating out of the University of Buffalo?
Yes.
Dr. Will, okay.
At the South Campus site, across the street from the main campus there.
Yeah, I'm very familiar. I used to work in partnership with them when I worked at the university. There is another hand, Dr. Ann Rivera, you're on.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I'm having connectivity issues. You can hear me now. Wonderful, thank you. So my question is about how the modifications to the resolution and the program regarding Jesse Ketchum Award winners would dovetail or complement some of the work that's being done with the entrance exams for criterion-based schools. how might that actually increase pathways? Because I think what Mr. Petrucci is saying is really important, that we need multiple pathways for students in order to access criterion-based schools, because one of the things we want to make sure is we want to honor all sorts of learning styles, learning differences, and learning abilities. There's a lot of skills that can't always be counted by one kind of test. In addition to what President Belton-Cottman is saying about historically the ways in which tests replicate systemic racism, I know that there's some initiatives on the table about this. Can you tell me a little bit more about how this would work with the other initiatives regarding our criterion-based schools?
Well, so if you're talking about how the district evaluates the quality of an admissions test so that it is as free from bias as it possibly can be, I probably would want to defer to Chief of OSA, Ebony Bullock, because I know she's made it a priority to have that examined each year. And, you know, Dr. Cash continues to be concerned, is this the best quality instrument that we would use for an admissions test? So there she is. Chief Bullock, I don't know if there's a comment you want to make about your own interest in evaluating our admissions tests.
So the comment that I will make is that we are RFPing out. That RFP has gone out through purchase, and we are looking to perhaps get a better quality test. The company that we're working with now, they say they have instituted measures to make sure that their test sort of addresses some of the concerns that we have around biasness. But certainly what I can do is gather that information and get it back to you guys, to the board, excuse me. I can get that to you within a few days so you can see how we have evaluated in the past. And I can sort of give you a summary of, in our new RFP process, what we're planning to do to sort of answer those questions, because they are important questions. And then
I appreciate that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm also having a delay connectivity issue, but that's the end. I don't have the answer for you right now. I will get it to you in the next couple days.
That's fair. It's a complicated question. I just wanted to reiterate also, first of all, I appreciate you sending that to us. I think that's really important, especially as we're talking about the ways in which equity and access need to be preserved, first of all, and increased, second of all, for all of our learners. So I think that's really critical, and these are the conversations that are going to get us there. Secondly, I just wanted to reiterate the importance of thinking about the ways in which we can increase that equity of access to all of the programming that our district has to offer, but also particularly with criterion-based schools, specifically with gifted and talented programs, just because there is a historic, and not just in Buffalo, this is, you know, national. There's a way in which historically they've been gatekeepers for students who don't fit a certain profile, and that includes race, that includes class, that includes learning abilities, specific kinds of learning abilities, not necessarily aptitude. And so I know that I, as a board member, would like to see us work on that more. And a good place to start is what we're doing now.
I wanted to tell you that Dr. Cressys and OSA, we just launched a new research project right now where we're doing exactly that. We're building sort of a equity-based dashboard, if you will, to look at our first priority, and Dr. K, correct me if I'm wrong, our first priority is to look at the criterion schools, but this dashboard is going to take a look at which kids are going to which schools, and and we're going to start looking by the subgroup. So yes, race and ethnicity, but gender, our students who are impacted by poverty, our students who may have a IEP, our English as a new language learners, all of that's going to be able to be sliced and diced. And Dr. Cressy's is leading that way with us. And so it is interesting, and it's fun work for my department. So you'll be hearing more about that. Then we're excited about that partnership with Dr. Cressy's.
I really look forward to seeing more of that. I appreciate that you're working in that direction.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. Change is constant, and I think this is a good start with Jesse Ketchum. Students, across this country, even with some of your Ivy League colleges, Yale, for example, Harvard, they have modified admissions. They don't just look at SATs, for example. So some of them have, thrown them in the garbage, and they look at other kinds of stuff that warrant admissions into their schools. And I think this is where we're going. We can't continue with a status quo concept. We have to look at this. And that was one of the reasons Lou and Sharon drafted this resolution, so that we could look at these young people who are top of their class, have been there since grade school, and we need to keep them in this district. We don't want them to go anywhere else. We want to keep them in our criterion schools. So thank you for that. I saw another hand. Who is this?
Go ahead, Larry.
Who is it?
It's Larry Scott.
Board Member Larry Scott, I apologize, you're on.
Sorry, thank you, Dr. Evans Brown, VP. Dr. Bullock, if you could also share with us the current assessment that is being used for the criterion-based schools. I know Hutch Tech, I believe, uses a different one, but I'm particularly interested in the one that's used for Olmsted and City Honors. I'm wondering also if there's a district committee that assesses criteria for our criterion-based schools, in particular City Honors and Olmsted. And then, I think it's kind of been mentioned already. I think at some point in the near future, the board should devote some time to a deep discussion on the criteria that are being used, the test that's being used to determine students that get accepted and enrolled at City Honors and Olmsted.
Right. Understood.
So, but as far as the district committee goes, is there like an operating committee that evaluates the criteria at this point?
The last time that any group convened was when we were reviewing the criteria and then establishing it as a part of our OCR monitoring. So that would have been probably around 2014-15, but then it really kind of took a boost under Dr. Cash's tenure around 2015-16. And one of the things then that the board approved at that point was, this is what's determined to be the criteria for all of these different schools, and these are the processes. The only change to that was more recently, when with the advent of opting out of state assessments, the board then made a separate decision to remove state assessments from any of the considerations that schools had been using as a part of criteria. So that was the most recent change that we made. But no, I will certainly discuss that with Dr. Cash, and bring your comment to him about, maybe it's time to take a fresh look at the whole thing again. So I'll certainly bring that up with the superintendent.
And I would include, if I didn't make that clear, the GT process too, for the GT process too for elements.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this issue. Sharon?
I just want to say on that GT process, yesterday, last night, in talking with Dr. Williams, I brought up the Commissioner's Regulation 117.1, 2 through 3, and that deals with the registration process for registering children, of which GT is a part of that. And it also states in there that children who have never been in the district are supposed to be assessed. I think we're not thoroughly doing a job, our due diligence in that area. Recently, I think they shared I think it was Education Law 4452, if I remember right. But the one that predates and is a prerequisite before that is the Commissioner's Regulation 117.1 through 3. We need to take a look at that entire process in registration because it is not happening. And we're not checking students that have never been to our district when they come in to test them to see what their assessments are. And so I think we need to take a complete look at that. And I asked Dr. Williams to take a look at that. I'm asking you also, Dr. Caresses, to take a look at that regulation. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, anything else on this issue? Dr. Caresses, we really appreciate the hard work you've done. We've come a long way, and we're going to continue to chip away at finalizing this Jesse Ketchum resolution update. So
I appreciate the great feedback tonight. I will incorporate it into the draft and then have something to share with you all very soon.
Okay, thank you. Next, we will, the next item under student achievement is New York State Regents, Exams, and Grades 3 through 8 tests. Dr. Darren Brown Hall.
Yes, and we are very fortunate tonight to have our Chief Academic Officer, Ann Botticelli, and our Chief of Accountability and Information, Ebony Bullock, to present on this topic. Thank you, Dr. Evans-Brown.
Mike, can you pull up the slides, please?
So good evening, esteemed colleagues, board members. So Ann and I are going to present to you about what we know now about what's going on with the New York State Regents exams and the grade 3 through 8 assessments. So Mike, if you can forward to the next. So as you may know, the federal government has mandated that we administer assessments in order to measure proficiency for ELA, math, science, and of course to make sure that we are tracking the progress of our English language learners. And so that comes from a federal mandate. And even though we are in a period of COVID and we know that our community is urging us to sort of hold off on giving those assessments this spring, the federal government has not actually waived the state assessments for 2021, but they are allowing all states to apply for certain waivers. And these waivers include maybe shortening the version of the statewide assessments. States could offer remote administration if it is feasible. States also have the ability to perhaps extending the test windows into the summer, or even perhaps into the beginning of the next school year. So those are sort of our options with waivers. Mike, if you go to the next slide. So Regents exams, as we know, they're a part of ESSA, right? The Every Student Succeeds Act. And it requires that students be assessed once in high school with ELA, math, and science. And of course, we have to annually administer the proficiency assessments that help us track English language learning and their progress. In absence of a waiver, New York State will administer the English Regents exam, Algebra 1, living environment, also known as biology, physical setting, and earth science, right? At the upcoming Board of Regents meeting, and it is on the 15th, the New York State Ed is going to propose some regulatory amendments, and the amendments basically are what you see on the screen. I'm basically saying that the Regents exams will not be required to meet graduation requirements, that any Regents exam that is not required by the U.S. Department of Ed, we could essentially cancel. And that all August Regents exams would be canceled. Again, it is the opinion of our state ed department that administering these exams would cause undue stress. So Mike, if you go to the next slide. So, and the state has said that, if you look at the last bit of information there, the state has actually said that this is an issue of equity and access, right? That it can't be safely given equitably and fairly to all students across the state because of the pandemic and how it's impacting our communities. I think earlier it was mentioned in the board meeting that, you know, we service a city, a community that is has been adversely impacted by poverty, and then you layer on top the pandemic. So the state is saying that these assessments cannot be fairly or equitably administered. Also, with respect to equity and access, I want to bring in that the pandemic exposed this sort of connectivity divide. We knew there was some divide around technology, but Myra and her team did a great job getting devices to our children. But then what we realized is there was issues, what folks refer to as dead zones across our city, where families just could not connect onto our networks to get the fantastic learning from our teachers. And so we know that we need to really sort of look at increased federal funding to support not just our district, but state infrastructures. Some other implications of administering these assessments deal with logistics. We service over 30,000 students. So if you could imagine bringing all of those kiddos in to take these assessments, and try to still maintain social distancing, that for just the test, and then alone for our adults when they're scoring, that is going to be a hurdle. And then we have the hurdle of our remote students who are either fully remote, and then we have students, as you know, that are hybrid, that they may only be in 2 days a week. And so all of those are hurdles that we need to think about. With respect to accountability, we will not be held to the same level of accountability as we traditionally have, right? So we are gonna request a waiver. We have where we're asking that our school identification sort of be held, and we know that that could happen, right? So whatever school is designated right now, that's what they will be in the upcoming school year. So if you're CSI now, you will continue to be CSI next school year. And then we're also looking for a waiving of the accountability with respect to participation rate. We all know that schools are held accountable if they don't have 95% of their students taking the assessment. And so we want a waiver of that. Lastly, I want to just bring in some data, again, in terms of implications of administering these state assessments. The 3 through 8 state assessments and the Regents are summative. So it's going to tell us, you know, what the kids have learned throughout the course of the year, and what the federal government says they want us to use this in a diagnostic way. It won't really help us sort of gauge where the kids going into the school year need to be. So that's a hurdle. Like, how would we use these summative assessments to gauge where we need to target our teaching for next school year? We do know that in terms of gauging where they are and where we need to go with instruction, we do know that pacing was sort of turned upside down by the pandemic. And we had to work really hard this year to recapture learning from the previous spring and prioritize learning goals. And we're sort of still in the midst of that. And so to give the assessments when we're in the work of that is a hurdle that we would have to think about. So these are things that we have to think about and figuring out the importance of these assessments, how we're going to give them with the logistics, the accountability, how we're going to use the data. And again, going back to equity and access, how we can safely give them in a way that supports our kids and does not do harm to our kids and our school communities. Mike, can you go to the next slide?
So we recognize that we didn't have state assessments last year, and we will be administering them this year, but we don't know exactly how many students will take those assessments, and we don't necessarily have the ability to use them for diagnostic purposes to target specific skills that students need to recapture. So we just wanted to share some of the other available data sources we do have, and then we could use this information to specifically target skills for students as they move forward into the next school year. So I'll just summarize these quickly. We have a couple measures that we use for the younger students. So for example, we use a screening measure called iStation in pre-K. We also use a qualitative screening measure with our incoming pre-K and K students that didn't take it in pre-K, just to see if the students are hitting certain milestones in their development. We test all new entrants, a screening measure for basic literacy and math. So no matter what grade level students enter, we do give them that assessment. We have DIBEL screening measures for literacy. We have STAR Math screening measures for mathematics up to grade 8. And then in terms of our multilingual population, we do use the Lost Links measure. That's for all of our dual language Spanish courses. And it measures the domains, the four modalities like listening, speaking, reading, writing in Spanish. We use the ERLA and the ANEAL with our multilingual students to assess their progress in literacy. This year, every year we give the NISATEL to new entrants who have potentially are going to be identified for English language learner services. We have not been giving it, and we're bringing it back now because it's an in-person administration. So we'll soon be starting the NISATEL administration, and we'll have that data. We also have some district benchmark assessments. Those are optional, but they're summative measures in our 4 core areas. And many schools have also begun to use common formative assessments at the school level. Mike, next slide, please. And just a few other assessments that sometimes we forget to capture when we're talking about our data sources. So all of our 10th graders will be offered the PSAT. We have advanced placement and international baccalaureate assessments that certain students take. The students who qualify for alternative assessment are beginning their NISA tests. We have the Committee on Special Education evaluations for students who've been referred, and that gives us a deeper understanding of where that student might need support. We obviously have our grades. So every quarter our teachers collect grades, and those are used to provide specific supports to students. And then we're also going to be RFPing for a 3 to 8 measure in literacy and mathematics to give us more predictive information towards state assessments in the future. Mike, the next slide, please. And then teachers have additional data sources available to them to use internally. So obviously they have their own observations. They have teacher-created assignments and assessments. Lexia placement tests all the students and then gives ongoing data about student progress. Myon actually contains a Lexile assessment that students who are when they're using Myon, they're periodically assessed. In the beginning of the year, we administered benchmark assessments using our new Moby Max system. So we were able to, if an incoming third grader would take the second grade benchmark. So students started the year with certain data points that teachers could use instructionally. Zern provides, K-6 provides information on mathematics progress. CASA Learning is used throughout the high school level for different Regents types of measures. And we have a lot of built-in programmatic assessments that teachers can choose to use. So in English and math, there are mid-module assessments. In math, there are exit tickets at the end of each lesson. And in English, there are quick writes at the secondary level. So there are actually a lot of data sources that teachers can use in sort of a formative way to help prepare their students. And these are obviously available every year. I think next slide, Mike, I think that's the end. Thank you. We just wanted to share this information with you. We knew you had questions about state assessments and Regents exams. And we obviously don't have all the information yet, but we're hopeful that after the Board of Regents meeting in March, that we'll have more information to share. And we wanted you to understand that there are a lot of data points available to the district and at the teacher level so that they can target the appropriate level of instruction and intervention for our students. So I'm sure people might have some questions, so I'll just open it up to everyone now.
Okay, so thank you for that, Ms. OSA Chief Ebony Bullock and Chief Ann Botticelli. We have a question here. When I think about assessments, I always think about teaching to the test. And it really bothers me because I think a lot of times kids are missing, information because we're teaching to the test. So that's just my take on it. All right, so we have someone in City Hall. Is it Board Member Larry and or
Board Member Larry?
Okay, there you go. You're on.
Thank you, Dr. Evans-Brown. So I don't really have a question. I just want to make a comment and have this on record for the public. Well, first of all, I will be introducing a resolution in regards to the mandate at this point to administer state assessments in this pandemic. Some of you have signed on as sponsors, so that will be introduced next week. But I want to make clear, I have a child in second grade and a child in fifth grade in Buffalo Public Schools. And the list of assessments that Ms. Botticelli went through, those are being implemented. There are staff that are actually using those assessments with my children, with all of our children. It's not just a generic list for people to look at. It is actually being used. And it is being used to provide information for teachers and for parents and to determine how to provide intervention. So my younger boy he needs some reading help. And through the assessments that have been done, and most importantly, through observation and the professional opinion of teachers and staff, they determine, okay, what the intervention will be in order to bring him up to grade level in the area of reading. So I just want to make it clear that these assessments are being done. Time is being spent on them. It's not as if our students are being ignored and we're not measuring their progress, and we're using the information from these assessments to determine instruction and to determine intervention. It's happening, and we don't need state assessments in order to determine how we progress and how we teach our children. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Board Member Larry. That is an accurate assessment. There's another hand, Board Member Paulette Woods. You're on.
Yes, I have a question for Ann. When we go on New York State, when we go to the New York State reports on how our schools are doing, when they give the ELA test, when they give the English.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Mrs. Woods.
There you go.
When we can look and see through their state assessments in English, math, and reading, how every school, charter, private, everybody is doing as far as whether their children are coming in above, 1, 2, 3, 4s, where they're coming in. It's one place objectively, and everybody can check that and see what our kids are doing. These multiple guidelines and various tests that are given, I don't know how they're standard or whatever. Where are you reporting, or where is there some objective report that gives us the same information that the state test would provide? What is your standard place where myself as a board member, a parent, anybody's looking at the schools, if we're going to say to charter schools, we're doing better than you, where is that data that I can say, no, look, our children are doing well, and here's where they are? And then when you answer that, where I can go and look at that, will you also answer me what the parents in the community are saying? Where is the next set of standard tests that will show them have the children who don't have the access, didn't have the hotspots, got their computers late, how far behind are they? So that we can say, okay, we need summer school or something to say objectively, they're a year behind, this is where they're at, this is what we're gonna do. Nobody wants to penalize anybody, but the parents want something that they can look at. I think we need something we can look at that's standard. And we do need to be able to say we're doing better than the private schools. I want you to answer how we're supposed to do that if there's no standard test and place that you can go to, especially if they're saying they're not going to use it to penalize us. So I just want to get an understanding.
So you asked a few different questions, and I'll do my best to respond. So there would not be one particular assessment that's comparable across all schools. Even the state assessment wouldn't be, because some private institutions don't necessarily take Regents exams, for example. So there's no one measure that you could use across all schools in the state. However, I think you're referring to the state report card, which shows how different school districts have done on state assessments. And so to your point with that, our internal assessments might differ from another district. So all districts don't use DIBELS, for example. However, that data is accessible to parents. In fact, when I would go to parent conferences, that would be one of the first things that the teacher would share with me, how my students performed on those screening measures. So parents have access to that data. To your point about the comparability, everyone in the state has to administer a screening measure. We chose to use DIBELS. Other districts might have chosen a different measure, but we're all required to have a measure in place. So the exact test might not be the same, but we're all following the same regulation. It's an RTI regulation.
When you say a measuring place, where is that reported, like the math and English and assessments? Where would you go to look and say, okay, these classes are doing at this level, our school is doing this, my school is where do you go to look at that? I know
right.
to go to the state. Where
districts are not required to report the those measures across or out to the public. I mean, we can certainly share internal data with you, but we're not required to post it somewhere online or something like that.
Paula, you're muted.
Okay, you say you can share. Is this something that you normally do? Is it someplace that I can go look at this?
Well, so we don't post that data, but if the board requests it, we can certainly provide data to the board. For example, Star Math we could run a report for you. And parents
And
have
that-
access to their own students' data.
Okay, individual students, there's 32,000 of them. That's data, that's not information. Information is data put together in a form like what the state does for us, so we can see, okay, here's where we are. So what's comparable?
And there is, and I can take it from here. There really is nothing comparable, Ms. Woods. It's unfortunate that the way we've done over the years with using New York State ELA and math data, and the way that many companies have tried to, to pit district against district, school against school, who's doing better because of the assessments and the results. What we really are looking for is to use the results from any type of assessment to improve instruction for individual students. It's not a competition, not to compare schools or to compare districts, right? Mr. Scott said earlier that when his kids are given those assessments, the teachers use that to better the education for the students, so we can differentiate the education, so we know what students may have missed, right? It's not to be used in a comparative manner, right? Education is not a competition. That's why we took out those ELA and math assessment results when we're looking at a total picture of a kid for admissions into some of our schools. So to go back to your original question, is there a website you can go to see how a school is doing based on the assessments that Ann and Ebony shared? No, there is not a website like that. To Ann's point, every district is using different assessments, and we want to make sure that we're assessing kids when they're ready to be assessed, to make sure they mastered the material that the teacher has taught them, right? Not to compare students versus students. But to Ann's point, if at another work session there are some assessment data that you would like to look at, we can definitely provide that to you, but we would need to go through it with you so that you can understand what the assessment was, what it's measuring, and how teachers have used that in the classroom to differentiate the instruction and to ensure that we are working in the right direction to get students to mastery of that material, not in a comparative fashion. This teacher did this way compared to this teacher, or this school compared to that school. Fair enough?
I'm looking for a measure that tells me the school is doing good, to answer the criticisms that we get thrown at us, that we're graduating children who can't read. They're going to 9th grade at reading at a 3rd grade level. How do we say, if we have nothing that is comparable to how do we measure ourselves and say how good a job we're doing with our students, and that our students are able to read at this level, and that we're graduating students who can compete, and that we are doing as good or better a job as these charter schools who are trying to steal our kids.
But
and then the other thing is, and if we need that baseline measure so we can see what was the impact of this year of remote learning, so that we can target improvement where needed.
Right. And that's exactly all those assessments that Ann talked about. That's exactly what those assessments are doing. And that's what we'll be doing going forward also, to make sure that we are catching students up where they need to be caught up at. But keep in mind, we still have graduation data. We still had an increase in our graduation rates to show that our students are being are able to master everything they need to, and they're demonstrating what they know and are able to do in order to advance out of high school. So we do have measures in place, Ms. Woods, to make sure that we are not leaving students behind, and that we are meeting them where they're at and then taking them to that next level. So like I said before, if there's specifics that you want, we can look to a future student achievement meeting, and we'll work with Dr. Evans Brown to bring some of those assessments and some of those assessment data and review that with the board.
Okay, perfect. You okay, Paulette? In the future, we'll bring some of that data to a student achievement meeting.
I really would appreciate that, because monitoring and letting our parents know, even being able to brag on our achievements and our students' level of reading would be something I'd be very proud of.
Okay, thank you. All right, President Cotman, you're up next, followed by Board Member Terrence Hurd.
Okay, so my question is about equity. You have this data and you've accumulated it for years. How does that translate into the supports for the students within the individual schools? In other words, I'm basically saying it that since you have the data, you have an across the board formula where you give each school some money based on whatever ratios you come up with. How is that data being used to support children in an equitable way? That's my question. Moving forward, how is that supposed to be used, particularly after last March, I think it was, or May, or whenever we filed the resolution of equity?
Well, so different data points do help us with RTI, so response to instruction and intervention. So we can look at a student's scores on certain screening measures and determine what level of intervention they would require to be more successful. So we use that specifically in reading and mathematics. So students will get intervention based on how they score on some of our screening measures. We also looked at grades to recommend students for summer school this past year, and that's something we do consistently. So we use different measures for different purposes. And I would say intervention is probably the most strategic method we have.
I need to know how that ties into the budget process. In other words, you identify a school that needs extra support versus a school that's doing great. How does that equate or work into the budget formula for these children? How are the resources being driven? Because for the longest, probably since I've been sitting on this board, I've said the same thing. We do not own our data. And if you owned our data, there would be resources flowing automatically. For example, I have two schools, CSI schools, that are now using your same formula. We went through this last year, and they're being required to reduce staff, et cetera, et cetera. However, we know that when we look at the data, the need is so great that it's not happening. And so what I'm concerned about in moving forward is that we don't have this conversation every year, that the data is that it's not the principal's fault that for some reason certain group of children are being put in certain schools. That's not their fault. But once we put them in those schools, how are we providing the resources to support those children? And I know you don't have that answer because it's not your question to answer in reality. It's Dr. Cash's question to answer. But in fairness, I wanted to point it out to the board that we're going through the same thing that we went through last year, same conversations. Okay, people are getting frustrated, and we know that we need more supports now than ever. And somehow or another, that data is not being used to make sure that we drive support for our students.
Can I say one thing, President Cotman? Because I don't want to belabor the point. I know it's past 7:30 already, but I will say that many of the schools, when looking at their school-based budgets in their school-based management team meetings, use that data to decide what they are going to put into their school-based budget.
Oh, I believe that.
Okay,
oh,
yeah. I want to make sure. Yeah, I want to make sure the entire board knows that. And I do know that when requests come through the Associate Superintendents of School Leadership, principals use that data to substantiate their request. And that's when Dr. Cash has that holdback every year. When you guys approve the budget and approve that holdback, he uses that data and reviews that data with those requests to substantiate giving schools extra when that is requested.
I'm aware of that.
Okay. I was making sure the whole board is aware of it.
What I'm saying is that this board, for the past 3 years, this will be the 3rd year, has had to go through the same conversation. When you realize that you have schools that are in greater need and they are not being given the supports up front, and all of a sudden for Christmas, if Christmas is in May, we give the schools what they need because the board is recognizing it. There's a need to look at the process. The process is not working for the most needy children in this district. Okay, and when we talk about it, Not only do we talk about the Title I programs or whatever, we look across the board, and the money is just given away evenly across the board. If you've got 350 kids, you can get 2.5 teachers for this subject. No one looks at the data and say the 350 kids are not even reading at level. We need to provide additional supports for those children. And that's the conversation that we want to have, because if
absolutely
my head is going to do a 360-degree spin, if we have the same problems that we had last year when those budgets are put before us, those needs should be addressed before they come before the board. I don't want to see Christmas in May. I want to see Christmas every day of the year for these teachers and principals who are trying to advocate for our children. And I'll get off my soapbox. The other thing is that
one thing, Mrs. Cotman, on that point, you'll be pleased to know that we are convening teams of administrators and teachers over the summer to develop new formulas for our school-based budget books also.
You know what is needed for this year? COVID. This is COVID, Dr. Brown Hall. This is COVID. We are going into a COVID-ridden environment. And if our children don't get the supports now, I fear what's going to happen in September. Okay.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure, and I want to assure you that, you know, like you and all the board members and all the staff and Dr. Cash, we do have the best interest of the kids at heart. I was just trying to share with you what's going to happen over the summer, because we were talking about those school-based budget formulas in resolve to your equity resolution. But I hear what you're saying, and I thank you very much. I will take that.
What? I have principals that are having the same conversations they had last year. Maybe it did not go up, but literally, I am not afraid to get a bullhorn and get in front of a building to address these issues. I don't have a problem at this point, because I can't keep saying the same thing over and over and over again as I sit at this table. And my question, and I'm sorry to put you on Front Street like that, but this should be a conversation. This should have been resolved years ago. That we are looking at the data inside of each building, and we're providing the supports that the children need to make them better. But I do have a question about individual assessments, because I sit on calls, national calls, and many school districts with this COVID time period are recommending individual student assessments where each child is assessed, the parents are informed where their child are, and then they are given achievement paths to, or you would know better than me, roads of pathways to be successful, to accomplish in this drought period. How do we get them within a year or within a 18-month period back on path? Have we started having any conversations like that?
Well, I think that we continually try to use our data. I don't know that I have done it exactly the way you described, but again, our RTI and the way that a teacher teaches is affected by the data that they have for each student. So, and we also prioritized at the beginning of the year, we looked at our curriculum and embedded lessons from the previous year or strategies and skills from the previous year into the existing curriculum, because we knew that we needed to make sure students had recaptured any learning from the previous year. So we make adaptations in the instructional practice every day, in the curriculum as well. And then the RTI and AIS that is offered to a student would align to that. But we didn't speak of it the way you're speaking of it specifically with a pathway.
This involves the parent piece, that the parent is informed in this piece, and that the parent is involved in a contract to try to help the child move to the next level or get to where they need to be. That's the piece I think that we might want to look into. Thank you for the work that you do. I know it's been a very difficult time. I will share with you that my granddaughter is at my house now until now. She's enrolled in school at 4 years old, pre-K, and I was very impressed with her teachers. She's over at Duville Porter. Mrs. I only had one teacher so far, Mrs. Quanatino or whatever. Excellent. I am amazed at how these educators are engaging these children in this virtual world, and they deserve to be saluted and appreciated. And I want to thank them for that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I'll make sure that School 3 hears that information. And if you have examples of what you were referencing with the individual plans, I'd love to see one. If anyone on your calls has shared any documents or anything, that would be helpful.
Well, we'll work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is such a robust discussion. And I just read something where the Buffalo district will be receiving $250 million through this COVID relief. And I'm so excited because some of that money can go to earmark what we've been talking about just now.
Right, and I just want to caution you, Dr. Evans Brown, I want to caution you because very similar to how we received money in the last stimulus package, the money that was earmarked for the district, the governor on the other side took that out of the aid he gave the district. So it was a complete wash. So if you read the article that actually quoted the other superintendents in the area, we are praying that that doesn't happen again, but that is a possibility. It's earmarked for Buffalo, but the governor may say, okay, since you're getting $250 million from the federal government, that's the amount I can withhold from your foundation aid. So we're just praying that doesn't happen. So we're cautiously optimistic.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. Dr. Brown Hall. Terrence Hurd, you're up next.
I believe somebody raised their hand about that issue.
Oh,
Terrence. The Council of Great City Schools is working on making sure that money makes it to the districts, and they are working with the new secretary and the new Biden administration to make sure that that does not happen. So let's please keep our fingers crossed and we have signed on to support them in their efforts to make sure that planning does not happen again. Thank you.
And I want to add to that Congressman Higgins and the Biden administration has written specifically into the law restrictions to make sure that grab doesn't happen.
Okay. Alrighty then. That's good news.
That is not accurate though.
Anybody else on that subject of the $250 million? All right.
McKinney Vento too. Put that in there. Put that on
That's right. We're going to do some things. You could do a lot with $250 million. Board Member Terrence Hurd.
Okay, let's not cross our fingers on that, but let's act on that just to make sure that our voices are heard and our needs are met for our kids. I'll just make mine quick. I'm more concerned about the PSATs, the SATs, and the ACTs. This is a COVID era, and I'm thinking about our high school seniors and junior varsity. We looking at what I like to say is that I'm more concerned about about them meeting those scores because they're in competition with not only our suburban district schools, but schools across the country when taking these exams. And I know our districts have presented, the last couple of months about that they're having our children being prepared to take the PSATs, and that's also said that today, and the SATs. I'd just like to know if we can gear education, more towards those exams for our high school and junior high school kids. I know we spoke today about a bunch of apps and a bunch of different educational tools that we use within our district, all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade, and it's so many. And I know our teachers working very hard to educate our kids, and families are working to making sure that they retain that knowledge. But also looking at our junior colleges, our HBCUs, our university, and what's the criteria we must meet for those children to be adapted to going to a good collegiate environment in the future. We know that they have to take a foreign language. We know their GPA has to be up. And even we look at our Ivy League schools, our Harvards, our Yales, our Cornells and Browns, we looking at, we know that it's a huge number. You have to receive of AP classes, our IB courses, our GPA has to be up, and we got to do something in preparation so that they can compete in these classes. I don't know if the district is saying basically using the apps and the learning tools that we used before, but I did request in the past about, how many of our children are going to college, reports about, what colleges are they going to, how many of our Criterion School graduates are going to Ivy League schools, and what subjects are they taking, and how are they doing in those classes? Is the retention levels high in these schools? And, and I'm still, waiting to see these type of reports come back to us so we can know. That would be how we will assess our value as an education system and the things that we are doing and not doing. I think that we talked about state testing and possibly not having it this year by state mandates. But let's concentrate and see what it's going to take for our kids to get to the other level, the next level, and just concentrate our efforts there. Thank you.
I just want to double check that was not a question you were asking, but making a statement, or is there something you wanted me to answer?
Terrence,
I think you're muted.
you're muted, Terrence.
Guys, I apologize. I know we keep muting all the time. It's not really a question for you to answer, but I just wanted to just gear our education more towards, meeting the standards so our kids can perform well in our PSATs, SATs, ACTs. I know that, around that time we take classes, that's supposed to help gear our children towards it. But it should be something that should be taught all year long. It should be something that should be taught, all throughout our high school and all throughout our, 7th and 8th grade when they start taking the AP classes. I just think that, they perform much better and get into better schools. I'm not saying, disregard other education or disregard other courses, that's the values that they can learn from those. But if we can gear education towards them, going to these collegiate and Ivy League and universities, I think that we have a great turnout. And I still would like to see some of the data, that we have, about our children going to college and what colleges are they going to, the retention on that. I know that's a whole nother gear to look to and try to do. But, that's very important. Because we need to judge ourselves. I just feel that we need to judge ourselves, of our output of our children and where they end up going.
Yeah.
Board Member Hurd, this is Dr. Williams. We certainly are able to provide you with information. Every year, Mrs. Younger's department, the Department of Guidance and Counseling, works with Say Yes to Education to identify exactly what you just shared, which colleges our students, are going to. And, as a support, we do pay. The board has approved for us to fund all of our 10th graders to take the PSAT and the 11th graders. And really, that's a test that's designed to really help to identify any gaps, any, academic gaps that students may have. And it is used by teachers, to try to fill those gaps so that the scores continually increase, so that the first time they're exposed in sophomore year, the scores are baseline scores. And then teachers are working, with wherever the gaps are per individual student, so that when they take it as 11th graders, hopefully, there's some increase, and it's preparing them to take the SAT, which we also pay for one of the sittings for the SAT for our students. And we even have, students who, with respect to the SAT, that are able to test for that test in our schools. We have some BPS schools that now serve as sites, so that even like transportation to schools that may be 10 miles or 20 miles outside of the city, they don't have to worry about doing that anymore. So we are beginning to crack that nut.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Williams. I'm just saying at the stage they take the PSAT and we see what the students lacking, I just think education should be geared towards, at that point, for them to be successful with the SAT. What values and tools do they need? What courses can we apply, so they can take these SATs, perform well against other people in other districts and across the country, so they can get into our higher level schools.
Can I ask one thing also? We also want to give a report of our CTE graduates, because one thing Dr. Alale many years ago taught us is that we should not be judging ourselves just on the number of students that get into college, because students that don't go to college are not less valuable. to the district, right? So we should also be looking at our students who are enrolled in CTE courses and career paths that they take, right? Because all of our students aren't going to college, although we're preparing them to have a choice about their future and what they want to do. We should not discredit or discount any student that does not go to college.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point,
Thank you,
Darren.
Dr. Brown, for bringing that up. Thank you again.
I just think we need to do a better job at tooting our horn, because we have a number, and we may not know this on this panel, but I know for a fact we have a number of young people who leave this district, whether they graduated from special ed, CTE, regular, some of our specialized schools, etc. They have massive number of what's the word? Admissions from various schools that they can take. They could select, for example, where they want to go. We have a number of them who get millions of dollars, in tuition. And we need to toot our horn, because we are doing a good job with a lot of these graduates. I was reading something the other day. We have the law program, and some of the kids are doing well. They're actual lawyers who finished over at, I believe it's Bennett. So there's a lot of stuff going on positively in this district with our kids, and we need to toot our horn. All right, that's just my soapbox.
Absolutely. We agree with you, Dr. Evans Brown. That's why we try to put as much positive information in the daily brief that Dr. Cash and Elena send out, so that will give you all more information to brag about the district. And so we're going to update, I believe it is updated on the district website, the major district accomplishments, because we want to brag about everything that's going on in the district and about our students and the great things that they are achieving. So we are really, really in alignment with you on that.
Thank you. There's a hand raised, Dr. Ann Rivera.
We'll make it very quick and just say, as somebody who works with college students every single day, our BPS graduates are delightful, they are talented, and they're brilliant.
Absolutely.
There's another example.
Yep.
So yeah, let's start talking about what we're doing right, because our kids can compete with anybody in this country. All right. Okay, so with that, any other questions on that area? If not, we're going to move on to the last item on the student achievement list, and that's connecting and engaging all learners. And I kind of wanted to just briefly see what we're doing and connecting all of our learners, because I was really sad to hear about the homeless, the McKinney-Vento population, to go from 900 all the way down to 200 and something kids during this pandemic. And so, we're all concerned about other children who may not be connecting for various reasons. I know I had one incident. I was helping this family, Lou and I, to find out why they weren't connecting, and we found out that they had an internet. They needed a new modem, and so Myra Burton was very instrumental in, giving this family. And she worked herself. She talked to Spectrum. They went out to the house that day. They put a new modem in the house, and the kids were, back on track. And they had not been in remote work for about 2 weeks. No, more than that, 2 months. Something like that. So we have those kids, and that's one of the reasons I wanted Darren to put this item on, connecting, engaging all learners. So Dr. Darren Hall.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans Brown. So tonight we have the pleasure of having our associate superintendents for school leadership with us, and they're going to present and they're going to talk to you about what schools are doing to connect and engage all learners. So we have Darlene Jezanowski, Ms. Kantan Dabney, David Hills, Toya Wilson, and our lead elementary associate superintendent, Dr. Cassandra Wright, and they'll take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Good evening, board members. Thank you, Mike. Could you go to the next slide, please? All right, thank you so much. All right, good evening. It's always hard to be the last presentation, but we're going to do our best to give you the information that you requested in an engaging manner. So when we thought about how to present this information, we started off thinking about categories of kids. So we thought about students who are thriving academically and socio-emotionally, students who are faring well or moderately well and have seemed to be well adjusted emotionally, students who are attending classes but not having success in coursework, or students who are not attending classes and not engaging with coursework. The more we thought about the categories, the more we realized that it really doesn't quite work that way. So the school administrative team, the teachers, and the support staff, hand in hand with families, collectively work very intentionally to provide individualized supports to each kid. So you may see some redundancy in our presentation, but that's because a combination of these strategies are used per the needs of each individual child. So consider this. As parents and caregivers, we can have 4 different children who respond to situations in 4 very unique ways. During this pandemic, children have responded in very unique ways. Their response to school during the pandemic is not necessarily tied to academic ability or economic status. So within the same healthy, happy 2-parent affluent family, you can have a child who thrives no matter what. Another child who goes with the flow and maintains decent grades, B's and C's, they seem well adjusted. Another child who works as hard as she can and she still struggles. While one child who worries the parents the most, who does not seem to respond to supports and actually recoils. But no matter what place a child is in, academic or socio-emotionally, the parents and caregivers do whatever it takes to ensure children get what they need to continue to grow no matter what category they are in. As a school community, we have utilized various supports and many children are actually thriving as evidenced by formative assessments, attendance records, anecdotal records from children, teachers, and families. And parenthetically speaking, I don't believe we need a state assessment to prove anything. According to the strategies that we have put into place, many children are doing quite well. You see the list. I won't read down each individual list, but I'll take the time to amplify 3 of them. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about the review of instructional practices to better meet students' needs. So remember, we were more than I. So what we had to do is draw upon what we learned from distance learning classrooms and from global scholars. Teachers listened to families and kids and made some shifts in their teaching methodology. For example, a whole lot less teacher talk, far more student-led activities, more time away from the screen, more group activities. And as you heard Dr. Williams earlier, probably one of the most profound impacts that a teacher had was a deeper connection with the student as a person. So the kids seem to do the best when they have a really solid relationship with their teacher. Another strategy that really helped kids to excel was allowing students to set their own schedules. So for example, we found that some kids needed to log in a little bit later and not worry about the negative consequences. We know that there has been some profound impacts on family dynamics. And so for some children, they needed a little more sleep. And we found that the teachers who understood that and simply welcomed their child into the classroom, no matter what time they logged in, they did better. They were able to thrive. Conversely, some kids, 7th and 8th grade, high school, they needed to have time to do their work, their asynchronous work, at night. So if they didn't log into Schoology at noon for their asynchronous time, but logged in at 11 p.m., for some reason they seemed to be wide awake, the teachers understood that and accepted that work without consequence. The teachers and the students began to communicate about what their academic prime time was. And the children whose teachers worked collectively with them really did a great job and were able to thrive in that environment. For other children, the utilization of peer leaders was profound. What we know is that children are social beings. That's why so many of them are struggling right now. But because some children needed to stay on remote or in remote, whether it is part-time or full-time, the teachers allowed children who are mastering concepts to become the lead teacher or the group leader. These children who proved themselves to be quite responsible were able to lead small groups for instructional purposes or small tutoring groups. And then they found that the children thrived together. So utilizing the talents within the teacher and the students just helped the whole class to thrive. So in those situations, we found that like when kids weren't listening to the adults, they were listening to each other, but the teachers and administrators and the parents were strategic enough to choose those children who would be responsible leaders. Darlene will discuss some specific examples regarding the child who is doing well academically and presents as well adjusted and is getting B's and C's and no complaints about behaviors. Darlene?
Good evening, board members. In this group, Mike, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Students in this group are doing well, but still benefit from a little encouragement and supports. So some of the supports that our schools are offering are providing office hours to our students. So if a student maybe have some concerns with some academics, the teacher can pull that student into those office hours groups and meet with them individually or in small groups to reinforce any skills that the student may need extra help in at the building level. They also have organized Schoology courses for easier access, and our principals have done a phenomenal job of being creative on how parents and students can access Schoology. We've had principals create Bitmojis where a student can log into the school's website and they can actually go to a picture that'll have their grade level on it. Click on that picture and it'll take them to their courses for the day. And that also helps support parents, and they see it in one central location. We also have our SST team members working with Tier 2. So they provide support in several ways. They could provide check-in supports to our families and to our students. So they do lunch bunches with students that maybe are struggling. And in many cases, some students that just want to meet with them and just talk about things that are going on in their home life or things that they're doing in school. And just need that little extra support and encouragement to continue with the work that they are already doing. We as a district have given schools the autonomy to give students additional time when it comes to missing assignments. So teachers are creating plans where students can make up any assignments that they have missed during that quarter to ensure that they're given every opportunity to be successful. Teachers will develop those plans, meet with students, lay out how they can make up those assignments and how they can submit them in a timely manner. And if a student is having difficulty meeting those goals, They can then also meet with those students during the office hours that we're providing to them. On technology, we are very fortunate that some of our community organizations are offering virtual field trips to the Science Museum, to Explore and More, to the Buffalo Zoo. And they are creating virtual activities and field trips that our students can participate in, whether they are remote or they are in person. We are now given the opportunity for our students, and I was fortunate enough to sit in on a lesson where students were actually presenting their PowerPoints to their class on a lesson on an activity that they had previously done, and they created as groups. And the children were so proficient in getting onto the Teams meeting, setting up their PowerPoint and explaining their PowerPoint to their classmates. And then we also have created breakout rooms that our teachers are now utilizing. So students can meet with their peers on different activities and then come back to their home, to the teacher, and share out what they're learning. So it creates more independent learners, which is really what we're hoping for our students as they move on to high school and to college. And we're also doing, our principals are doing a lot with recognizing our students by sending home Student of the Month awards, and even going to the homes and presenting students with those awards to make sure children are recognized regularly on what their accomplishments are. And in many instances, they're giving them little goodie bags, but trying to really keep them involved in what they're already doing in school, but even so that they feel that what they're doing is being acknowledged in a positive way, to make sure we keep them engaged in the learning environment and what they're doing in school. So now our next presenter will be David Hills.
Thank you, Darlene. Thank you, board members. So there are students who have experienced stress and trauma, as so many of us have during the pandemic, and they're engaging, they're online, they're coming in person. But because of maybe their emotional load or things that are going on, or even they're trying to do a lesson and there's a large number of other children in the house and their ability to focus is not as strong, it's affecting their academic results, their ability to demonstrate mastery. And they may feel overwhelmed. These are the students that may be getting 1 or 2 incompletes in a quarter. And schools are taking targeted approaches to start to reaching those students and reaching those learners. If you look on Mike, if you could go to the next slide. We tried to make this as small as possible. I apologize for that. This is where there's starting to be a layer of some real robust strategies added in. If you cluster some of these to streamline our practices, as you've seen in other slides, Schoology has been organized so that when a student goes on, navigating Schoology is not part of the cognitive load. They're able to quickly get to what they need to do. Practices have been targeted, and assessments are refined to meet students' needs, and also to identify the high leverage standards that need to be mastered. Assignments are made accessible. If a student maybe has some incompletes or has some assignments to make up, those assignments, it's addressed, what is the barrier for that student? Why are they having a hard time? If they are having a difficulty producing mastery on a computer format, one school calls it the Pony Express, and they actually are delivering packets to households so they can have a combination of online and paper learning. If it's a student that missed 4 or 5 assignments in a week, instead of making them do each one, they're clustering the assignments to key on what the mastery strategies are. What exactly are the standards that needed to be assessed in those assignments? Schools are creating, even between courses, combined assignments that count for multiple assignments that maybe is an English language arts class and a social studies class. Schools are creating complex and lengthy Nearpods that essentially are a flipped classroom, that if a student accesses the Nearpod, does the task in the Nearpod, that will be a compensation for the learning. So they've streamlined to really look at, and we have Nearpod, we have packets. Some schools have set up makeup folders on Schoology of replacement assignments, alternative assignments. So there's a lot of strategies to just make it easier. Because if you're having a bad week, a bad month, for many of our students, we just need to reduce the cognitive load for accessing the curriculum and demonstrating mastery to make sure that they can show what they really know. There's also flexibility built in. You've heard about in other presentations about office hours at other times. And about alternate learning assignments and engaging technology, those virtual field trips, the teacher that goes out to a creek and films a lesson that they put online to show a certain story from Harcourt or from trophies or from a certain lesson or a certain ecology element. Many of these students in this cluster have been the ones that have been returned to in-person, so that they are in those 100 high needs students that are able to access personal supports to get them on track. And there were also many opportunities for credit recovery. You have many of the schools that do credit recovery have grad point in after school programming. There are hubs. They're able to do, with some of their individual school funds, credit recovery after school. Also, the Redesigned Pathways programs has 10 teachers assigned to school buildings that are embedded during the school day that help with credit recovery. So those options, and Dr. Wright and Associate Jezanowski mentioned also some of the programs that we use to measure student learning, ZERN, MIOD, that list of assessments. Many of those are adaptive learning programs where you take an initial assessment, and if you have a gap in your skill level, it helps you go back to build that gap as you have in ZERN. So you have that flexibility, and as was mentioned earlier, Teams now has the ability, since I think Christmas time around December, to have breakout groups that are very robust. The teachers are using those to have ability-based groups, and if there's a extra staff member that can help with the classroom, to have a breakout group either during synchronous time or during asynchronous time. So that flexibility is key. And then lastly, a lot of these elements you see here are to empower or outreach to students. We have CLRI embedded in the curriculum and social emotional learning, and there is a multi-tiered support systems coordinator, systems of support coordinator, that is helping schools identify extra supports. We keep learning as a district how to reach out to students and how to break down barriers. And we're also creating systems where we help students with time management. We give them a key individual they work with that helps them to manage their time. And as you may know, we have a communication tool in both the Talking Points program for English language learners, and also when anyone contacts a student, they record that contact in Infinite Campus in a parent-teacher contact tab, and anyone that looks at that student can actually see that contact. So if there's a barrier, that gets recorded and all the teachers can see that barrier, so they can all address it. If there's a strategy that works, it can be shared that way. Schools are meeting in team meetings. Some successful strategies for students that are on site that are struggling is actually have a teacher that has a strong relationship with the student that helps them to make a plan for how they're going to get their work done, what they need to do, how they're going to prioritize. That helps them to do some of that executive functioning, that thinking through what I need to do to succeed. So those areas, the streamlining of what we do, the flexibility and empowering and outreach, helps us to meet the needs of those students who are present, who are taking the step forward every day, but are not necessarily seeing evidence of mastery. And I'm going to pass it on to Associate Dabney.
Good evening, school board. Mike, if you could move the slide to the next, move to the next slide. Can we move to the next slide?
You did.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. I can't see it on my screen. So I'll just continue. So the last group of students that we want to talk about strategies for support for that particular group are students who may not be attending class and who are not engaging in the coursework. What we want you to know and realize is that this outreach for those particular students began last March. And what our principals and school leaders and teachers and support staff have continued to do is to continue to reach out to those families. Throughout the time of since last March and through the pandemic, we realized that a student may connect one time, a student may be connecting for 2 months, and then they may not connect. And so those strategies that we have in place are continually refined by our schools. So we've worked on improving communication to our families through our liaisons that we continue to use. We continue to make sure that we're reaching out to our E&L families to make sure that they not only understand what comes through a translation in a meeting, but also through what we're giving in writing to our families. We have principals who do, for their bilingual learners, have meetings for their Spanish-speaking families, have meetings for their English-speaking families. We have other schools who reach out to families and have in-person meetings with our E&L families to ensure that we are meeting their needs in case there is any communication gap. We continue to use in Infinite Campus our parent-teacher contact tab. One of the things that we realize and schools have realized through reaching out to families and reaching out to other people on those emergency lists is that they have other contact information that the schools may not have been given. And so because of that, that information tab is very important because that last contact may be the contact that the teacher needs, and the social worker may be the one who received that information, and the teacher may need to reach out. And so having this one place where we keep information that we connect with families helps in the communication to them and to reach out to families and parents if their child is not connecting. I'm not going to go through this list, but I do want to point out some things that we continue to do. We use a variety of means to connect with our students. What principals are reporting and what we are seeing that they're doing is not just using phone, text, emails, not just trying to contact and work with families during the school day, but also reaching out to them over the weekends, in the evening, using social media, and other strategies to reach families, not in just our traditional ways from 8 until 4 o'clock, because we know that we have families that work during the day, but using alternate strategies and alternate times to reach out to families. Our administrative teams and teacher teams continue to conduct home visits. We continue to engage our community partners, Say Yes and Journeys In, that may have other ways to reach out to our families. We have designated staff at each of the buildings, our attendance teachers, our counselors, and our social workers who work with this particular group and with the families in this particular group on a daily basis, reaching out, trying to connect and reconnect students to instruction. We have been trying to identify those students for in-person learning so that when we are able to connect with families, those are the families that we are inviting in emergency situations. We're inviting them in as needed. We continue to confer and adapt the supports to make sure that, and I believe that Tanja Williams addressed this earlier, some of our families need support outside of what is just helping students with instruction. They need support with connecting to a food bank. They may have had a fire and they may need tech support. And so our schools have been reaching out to families and trying to address that need and then reconnect the family. I think my colleagues have gone over a lot of the other outreach strategies, but what I think is most important for everyone to know is that our principals, our teachers, our schools, our district have not given up on reaching out to students, no matter which category of learner they fall into. Each and every day, our schools are attempting to meet the students and families where they are. So whether it's a student that is fully engaged, teachers are continuing to work on concurrent instruction, in-person instruction, assessing students. And for those students who may not be engaged and families that they're not being able to reach, they have staff that continue to reach out to those families, search for those families, reconnect those families so that we don't have one student lost in our school district. So we appreciate you taking the time to listen to our presentation tonight, and I will turn it back over to Dr. Brown.
So Dr. Evans Brown and board members, you can see that we are very, very working very, very hard to engage all of our students and to make sure that we have robust programming at all of our schools to make sure that we're keeping our students engaged and keeping track of our students. So I hope you got that from what the associates presented. Again, they are a phenomenal group of colleagues to work with, and the principals are also a phenomenal group to work with as they support their teachers and really make sure they're supporting all the students in their school building. So we owe a lot of the, the commendations to our principals. So Dr. Evans Brown, I'll turn it back over to you. There's probably board members that have questions because I see some hands up.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for such a robust, detailed presentation. You put a smile on my face. I'm excited. There is a hand, and board member Terrence Hurd is first. You're up.
Great presentation, and thank you, teachers, administrative staff, for all the work that you're doing and working with our children to try to get a balance. Just hearing the different times of that a child can hand in work for the education is crucial, and it's going far and beyond what the call of duty was a year ago. As a teacher, to the things that they're doing now and working with our children, and our children also adapting to this new way of learning and virtual learning, getting work in, and it's a different type of relationship, that you establish with them. Could you give me more, just later on, send me email possibly on more of your high school credit? That was in the last slide. Just more information about this. If you could send me an email or anything like that.
You're talking about the credit recovery, Terrence?
Yes. Just know more about the credit recovery program. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, board member Hurd.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other? Okay, board member Paulette Woods.
To Ms. Dabney, how large is the group that you were addressing that are disengaged? Is that the 17%, which is maybe 5,000 students? How large do you estimate that group of students that you were speaking about?
If I may take this, Ms. Woods, hi, it's Ann. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I was actually speaking with Ebony and Dr. Cash about that very question, and we're pulling together the data, so we'll have more specific numbers for you.
Do you have an estimate, because you've been saying it's maybe 17%, which would be about 5,000 students, and I do commend you on the presentation as far as the ways of outreach, but I would like some indication of how big of a task you're facing.
And as soon as we get those numbers.
I don't want to speculate on numbers, but we will get you that data.
Yeah, as soon as we get it, we'll get it out to the board members.
And I'm sure, and I know this because I follow research, that it's just not Buffalo. This is happening across the country. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for us, at least we are explaining some of the wraparound services that we're doing, some of the interventions that are being put in place, such as home visits, calls, texts, media, etc. Those are all critical in utilizing, community-based organizations, You know, sometimes we have to use non-traditional ways of bringing kids in and engaging parents, and that's what we're the experts here. We know how to do that. So it certainly sounds like, you know, you guys have really touched on a lot. I've been working in the community for many years, and I'm in concert with what you're doing. So yeah, it's across the country. It's not just Buffalo. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, and Rivera, Dr. Rivera.
It's less of a question, more of a thank you for the instructional strategies that you're detailing here. A lot of this is best practices in online engagement with students. I'm particularly impressed with the way that you're looking at moderately well students. You're providing fewer, more meaningful assignments, you're modifying grading practices, you're embedding SEL and CLRI in coursework. And I really, really like the way this was tiered. You know, you're thinking about what's working for the students who are advanced and you're feeding that need. You're thinking in the next tier and what they might need, all the way down to the students that are really, really struggling. And I like hearing how sensitive you are to the situations of students who may be struggling. It's because of the context. You know, as Dr. Evans-Brown pointed out, this is a national problem. This is a problem because of COVID. And I appreciate the work that you're doing with this. And I also just really love that you're allowing students to submit assignments at different times, because I can just speak personally as a working parent of a working family with a 7th grader who is in virtual learning in BPS. Allowing that means that we can come home, we can spend some time with her, we can help her out, and her stress level has gone down since that has been the norm. So just as a parent, thank you for that.
Thank you, Ann. And I think, you know, all of us are doing things differently. I work, you know, hybrid from my job, you know, and some days when I'm at home working, I could be doing an assignment at 11:30 at night, but, you know, getting the work done. And so this is new for us, you know, in terms of this whole pandemic. And I know I was at my great nephew's home the other day. My niece has all boys. She has 4, like me. But the point is, I watched them. You know, I didn't interfere, but they're in Buffalo schools. And they did their remote work. They would, you know, get on, do the math. One in this side of the house, one on that side of the house. And they were really involved. I was so impressed. Somebody was upstairs when they took a break. I said, what time do you go back on? I go back on at 11 o'clock, you know. So they were really into it, and they have it really down pat. So they decided not to, my niece decided not to return them to in person. So they're doing full remote, and they're thriving. Awesome. Every child is different. Every household is different, and whatever works, let it work. But and I'm glad that you guys are really reaching out and doing non-traditional things to engage the young people who may not necessarily who are struggling, and those are the ones that we're concerned about. In addition, any other questions?
I just have one question, please. So are we moving forward with next week, returning children back to school, phase 2?
On March 15th, next week, Monday, absolutely. Board.
And thank you all for the work that you're doing. You still have smiles on your face, so you're doing well.
Well, we also want to thank the board for allowing us to come and present all the great work that's going on in the Buffalo Public Schools. It gives the board members an opportunity and our stakeholders the opportunity to see exactly what's going on and how well our teachers, our students, our administrators are really taking this. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Anything else? If not, I will conclude student achievement.
Thank you.
And
Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Great job.
Good night.
Brown.